The story began in a grim place, where a young man waved his hand, took a deep breath, and bitterly admitted he seemed to have failed again, as he had dreamed of creating a sword as dense as a neutron star. Staring into the boiling liquid, he suddenly doubted whether he would ever master this magic, realizing that this way he would never be able to fight on equal terms in unequal conditions. Trying to push away dark thoughts, the boy closed his eyes and took another deep, almost desperate breath. Raising his hand high, he summoned the magic of flight and decisively launched it, thinking it might be time to finally visit the bustling city he hadn't seen in a long while. As the faces of 3 people suddenly came to mind, one hesitantly admitted he barely knew the area. Another exclaimed he had urgent business and had to leave, and the third said he couldn't die because he needed to return to his family in the village. The boy thought the hermit must be struggling and decided they should find companions. In an instant, the space before him split open, revealing a massive portal right beside him, leaving him deeply stunned. He opened his mouth in surprise and froze, letting out a short sigh without taking his eyes off the portal, wondering what it could be. Suddenly, a magical circle lit up beneath his feet, pulling him toward a strange object. He guessed it was flight magic but quickly dismissed the idea since he had no trouble with that. The closer he got, the more unsettled he became by the origin of this distortion in time and space. In a panic, he braced for battle, fearing that if the anomaly started pulling everything in, disaster was inevitable. And at that moment, a small hand reached out to him. The young man froze, almost stepping back, shielding his face and body with his hands, terrified and asking what it all meant. Suddenly, a silhouette of a girl slowly emerged from the distorted space, stepping out of it with a gentle smile. The boy seemed enchanted. His cheeks flushed slightly, but fear remained, and with a trembling voice he asked who she was. The stranger smiled gently, introduced herself as Resea, and said she was the goddess of spells. After she introduced herself, silence fell over the air. The boy stayed quiet, while the girl just looked at him and smiled. Suddenly, he turned away, barely holding back laughter, unable to believe the girl seriously called herself a goddess, which sounded ridiculous, while the stranger kept a calm smile. Trying to stifle his laughter, the guy cleared his throat and asked what exactly she meant. The girl apologized warmly and explained that she was a goddess from another world, here to find a hero to summon. Smiling, she said she was meant to appear beside the strongest person in the world, and asked if that person was him. A chill ran through Molodika, as he wondered if this girl was really going to tell children's tales about a goddess choosing a hero for a journey to another world. Unexpectedly, the goddess told him this was no fairy tale at all. And hearing that, the boy froze instantly, stunned that she had answered his secret thoughts. He wondered if she had overcome his anti-magic and read his thoughts. The boy politely introduced himself as Exiled, the strongest in this world, and added that no one among humans equals him. Looking at the girl, he asked if he could join her on the path of heroism, believing that with her support, he could even face the perfect ones. The goddess was genuinely pleased and asked again if he would truly go with her. She thanked him joyfully, noticing his strong reaction, while Exiled felt a strange excitement wash over him. He asked what he should do next, and Resea told him that by the king's order, he must defeat the demon king. Exiled agreed, though deep down he couldn't believe what he thought was nonsense. Resea smiled and pointed to the warp in space she had emerged from, asking if he was ready for the journey. Without overthinking it, the young man easily agreed, and the girl immediately touched the distortion with her hand. At that moment, a sharp crack echoed across the square. Exil's body began to crumble, pulled into the distortion, and he tensed, feeling himself being sucked inward. He believed that without risk, there's no reward, so he chose to see it through. Exiled decided to stop resisting, closed his eyes, and let himself go with the flow. The next moment, he felt a slight tingling, and opened his eyes to find himself in a vast hall, with Resea and many others standing before him. Exiled looked around in awe, wondering if he had stepped into another world, while Resea stood behind the elegantly dressed man, shaking her head, and he greeted Exiled with a smile. With arms outstretched, the man declared that he was the king of this land, and that he was the one who had summoned him here. Looking around, Exiled saw people nearby he had never met before, and realized he wasn't the only one summoned here. He heard the king ask another man if only 4 heroes had been summoned this time, and when the man confirmed, Exiled quickly realized something important. He looked closely at these people and noticed that, for heroes, their magical power was very low, and he was genuinely surprised that they were considered the strongest in their own worlds. Exiled thought he wanted to check their status, but then the man from another world smiled and said he wanted to introduce the newcomers first, so Exiled decided it was best to listen to the information before anything else. The man began explaining that their world is home to 3 main races: humans, half-humans, and demons. with half-humans being very few and hardly posing any threat to the others. Hearing this, Razel noted that so far, everything seemed like his home world. But then he suddenly grew serious and said the whole problem was the demons. He explained that humans and demons have always been at war, but recently the demons' power has surged, and now humanity is under their control. That's exactly why all these people were called here. A hero draftee, a government official, a con artist, another hero, an adventurer, a realist, yet another hero, a mercenary, a big shot, and the mysterious drafty Razel. The young man smiled, remembering how he used to hunt demons, training hard on them, and earning thanks from countries all around the world. The man bowed deeply and expressed hope that the heroes would help destroy this evil race, saying they must defeat the demon lords so they can live a life free of worries. Prodhijo smiled and said it sounded incredibly appealing. Raol laughed, calling it a great test of his strength. Banza declared that as enemies of humanity, they would be destroyed without hesitation. Razel remained silent. The maid brought in an object covered with cloth on a small tray, and the man explained that they first needed to measure each person's current abilities, politely asking the heroes to place their hands on the crystal ball. Lifting the cover, they saw a sphere. The results were meant to show only basic combat stats since its formula couldn't pinpoint anything specific, and Razel wondered if they really planned to turn mana and magical power into mere numbers using some formula. The smug Riol decided to be first, claiming he was called here before anyone else, and he touched the orb. A bright light flashed in the air, and Riol asked, confused, what was happening. A man ran up to the bullet, shouting that this just couldn't be true. Riol, confused, asked what was wrong, but the man was at a loss for words to describe the adventurer's fighting power. Finally, he exclaimed with excitement that Riol's combat power was 4,097 units, an impressive feat. The adventurer beamed with pride, while the goddess quietly sighed in amazement. Razel just started wondering if that number was really that big when a sly trickster approached the ball, adjusted his glasses, and said it was his turn now. Placing his hand down, he discovered his combat power was 3,664 units, and he noted that even the government official turned out to be very strong. We quickly checked Banzu. His combat power was 3,776 units, and the man exclaimed that they were all capable of standing their ground. He was genuinely impressed and said this was exactly what they expected from the summoned heroes, then turned to Razel, saying it was his turn now. The young man nodded calmly and stepped forward. As he approached the sphere, he thought more about how this device couldn't measure anything specific, while all the heroes' eyes were fixed on him. Strangely, the bullet didn't react at all. Razel quietly told his colleague the device wasn't working, and the man quickly apologized awkwardly, laughed, guessed something was wrong with the bullet, and then looked closer, clearly very surprised. He noticed the bullet had cracked. Razel asked in surprise what was wrong, and the worker awkwardly laughed, saying everything was fine and asked to test the strength again. The young man placed his hand on the bullet, and the man's face suddenly went pale as he apologetically told the king that the boy's combat power was 0. The ruler got angry and asked again if he had heard correctly that the power was 0, and the worker sheepishly confirmed, adding that the crystal was perfectly fine. Razel politely raised his hand, wanting to share his concerns about the device that was seriously troubling him. But the king refused to listen. He thundered for Razel to leave immediately, declaring he wouldn't accept a hero with no magic and ordered him out of the castle, leaving the boy stunned. He asked the ruler to wait, thinking there must be a mistake. He definitely had magic. But then he looked around, doubting he could do anything, until his eyes caught the flames in the fireplace, and an idea sparked in his mind. Razel quickly leaned forward, reaching out his hand and urging the king to look. The young man used atomic reconstruction, a technique requiring at least 7,000 units of combat power, perfect for showcasing his abilities. The worker exclaimed in great surprise and confusion that the coal had truly turned into a diamond, his hands trembling with excitement. Razel smiled and asked the king how he liked that, and if he now understood that he possessed magic, to which the man indignantly demanded how he dared behave that way at all. The king shouted in anger that no technology could turn coal into diamonds, and the young man, confused, asked what he meant. Razel insisted it was just a normal technique, but realized it probably existed only in his world. At that moment, the king shoved him roughly in the chest, ordered him to be silent, called him a helpless fraud with contempt, and kicked him out of the castle. Riol laughed mockingly, saying how sad it was, and the con man, adjusting his glasses with a smile, agreed it was truly pathetic, while Banza couldn't believe the guy had tried to fool them with a fake. Deeply moved, Razel tried to reach out to the goddess, thinking that probably no one here knew this technique. The goddess looked at him indifferently, while he struggled to grasp what was happening. The king loudly ordered a servant to call the guards, and the servant immediately ran to carry out the command. When the knights arrived, the boy was told to take his stone, and the king sternly warned Razel never to return, ordering him to be banished. Some time had passed. Razel was sitting on the street in the city, catching the curious glances of passers-by, and a little girl asked her mother what had happened to the boy, pointing at him. The woman told her daughter not to look at him. The girl didn't understand why, while Razel sat on the edge of the fountain, quietly muttering in frustration about what to do next. He remembered how the king had cast him out and couldn't believe it had happened so easily, boiling with anger that they had dared to treat him that way. Then suddenly he froze, lifted his head, and said enthusiastically that the approach needed to change. Razel set off on the road, thinking about his next steps. But first and foremost, he wanted to be sure of one thing. The young man entered the workshop for tools and weapons, where purchases were made directly from visitors. At the entrance, the shopkeeper greeted him, surprised to see the boy for the first time. Razel placed a precious stone on the counter and asked if it could be sold, and the merchant was struck by the diamond's beauty. The man asked why he wouldn't take it to a jewelry store, and Razel replied that the stone was fake and thought trying to sell it to jewelers might be seen as fraud. He asked if there were stores that accepted fakes, and the seller, annoyed, asked if he was joking. The guy asked if he had ever considered using precious stones in industry, like for cutting tools or engraving. The seller asked in shock what was going on, and exclaimed that by selling the diamond to jewelers, he could live in luxury for 10 years. Razel, surprised, said he understood and wondered if anyone in this world really dealt with fake stones. The man didn't expect any trouble with the jewelers, so he just told the guy to leave, and even asked which country treated diamonds so disrespectfully. Razel wanted to sell the stone quickly and get the money, but he was put off by the fact that it was fake, and the guy clicked his tongue in frustration. Razel sighed and asked how much a night at the hotel would cost, and the seller replied that the cheapest room was about 10,000 shares per night. The young man sighed thoughtfully, said he understood, then asked what the seller thought about 70,000 for the diamond. The seller, surprised by the urgent need for money, exclaimed the price the young man had offered in shock. The man got angry and started yelling, asking what kind of new charity this was, but Razel denied it and explained he just didn't want to be seen as a fraud if synthetic diamonds ever became common. The seller was shocked and quickly refused, saying they would immediately suspect him of fraud. Razel silently watched the man, then suggested a different approach, reminding him that the seller values the diamond, but he urgently needs money, so he asked what the man would say to a 70,000 deposit, to which the man agreed, guessing the boy was probably in a tough spot. Razel reached out his hand, saying they had reached an agreement, and the man shook it, confirming the deal. After that, the guy left the workshop and the shopkeeper called him back to come again. Razel thought that he finally had the money, even if it took him longer than he wanted. He also realized that alchemy seemed underdeveloped in this world, and the money system was completely different. The young man felt a tough road lay ahead. The Hotel Mari was pretty quiet, and the girl at the front desk told the guy he'd have to stay there without meals included. Razel took a deep breath and said he was terribly tired. Placing his hand on his head, he admitted he felt completely out of place. He opened his eyes and decided that the first thing he needed to do was gather his thoughts. The guy didn't believe the goddess was truly a deity from another world. She used an interdimensional summoning spell, and he thought it would cause only a temporary shift. But the magic level here was also very different from his own world. Suddenly he jumped up, stunned by the thought that this just couldn't be real, and it hit him. This was a parallel world. The young man waved his hand to activate the quantum space analysis, and after checking the data, he was utterly amazed by what he saw. Razel, confused, asked what was wrong with the laws of physics here and noticed many unknown substances. He leaned back on the bed, thinking it seemed true. The young man concluded that everything that happened wasn't a game played by a made-up goddess, but rather his exile by the king was probably a surprise to her. Thinking it over, the young man decided that from now on, his mission was to save the world, though he wasn't sure if the goddess would be pleased if he killed the Demon King. Then he wondered what kind of Demon King this could actually be. Razel imagined him as a selfish, powerful mage, crazy and eager to burn everything around. The young man wondered if this demon was truly that mighty, since nothing like it existed in his world. Turning onto his side, he thought everything here was different, because the demons in this world were smart and ruled by a single leader, which gave him an idea. Razel paused for a moment, wondering if maybe they weren't truly evil after all. He knew nothing about the situation in this world and hadn't expected any cooperation after being cast out. He got out of bed and confidently said he had made up his mind and now knew what to do. He firmly declared that he intended to meet the Demon King in person. Razel wondered if the magic from his world would work here, so he decided to test it by activating detection magic, and a small window appeared in the air, making him happy. In front of him appears a reconnaissance satellite with a printer, a device used for studying the terrain. He released a small object out the window and, confident in the outcome, ordered his companion to chart a course to the Demon King's location. Razel lay down, closed his eyes, and decided to take a quick nap while the route was being prepared. Morning came quickly, and with the first rays of the sun, he opened his eyes. The guy was surprised he slept until morning. When he got up, he saw the route map was already ready and excitedly said it turned out just perfect. Using magic, he folded the map and reactivated his detection spell, noticing something strange. There was someone else in his room. Using a high level of detection, he realized that people were hiding there, watching him. A quick analysis showed there were 5 of them, so Razel decided to use eavesdropping magic to overhear their conversations. One of them asked the other if he was sure Razel had stopped at that hotel, and he confidently said there was no doubt. The young man guessed these people had been sent by the king. When the young man stepped outside, the mercenaries quickly ducked behind the roof, making sure he was the summoned hero who had been banished from the palace. Razel turned the corner, thinking the king was truly against him, while the mercenaries checked to make sure everyone was in position. They repeated the plan. Kill the target and bring back the head as proof. Razel glanced back quickly and decided to use the mercenary aiming at him, a man named Green. Seeing no strangers nearby, the mercenaries decided to act, and one of them reached into his pocket after receiving the order. He pulled out a small bundle and quickly aimed a dart at Razel's neck, who immediately realized it was a poison that would put him to sleep in seconds and decided to use protective magic. Pretending to have lost consciousness, he fell to the ground. The mercenaries gathered around his body, declaring the mission complete and that all that remained was to eliminate the evidence. One of them pressed a sword to his neck, grabbing his collar, and at that moment Razel spoke words about a quick reception. In the next moment he suddenly sprang to his feet, stunning the mercenaries in the room, and struck them with a bolt of lightning magic, leaving them frozen in shock. Everyone dropped to the floor, trembling from the attack, as Razel created a fog and threw it to make the mercenaries fall asleep for a while. He reached through the window to grab something from his gear, and pulled out a multifunctional trunk cage he had found earlier. This is a cellular element that serves as the basis for clones, needed to create body copies for skill training. Since he couldn't constantly produce clones with high combat abilities, he decided to hide this element. Razel thought that he might not copy the abilities, but would have an exact replica of his body, so he used a technique called cellular differentiation. In the next moment, a body shell appeared before him. Razel began refining the details, adding a bullet wound and dressing it, thinking that maybe he wouldn't be allowed to live at all. After a while, he finished his work and thought that he had already used magic to restore this area, and the rest would be completed by others. Razel stretched wearily, mentioning some unwanted work had come up, and firmly declared that now was the time to head to the land where demons dwell. Some time passed, and dusk began to fall over the city. The man lying on the floor groaned and stirred. The mercenaries slowly came to, confused about what had happened. One guessed they had just fainted, another wasn't sure, and thought it might have been their target's protective magic, when suddenly one froze in shock, and the others asked what was wrong. In front of them on the floor lay Razel's body. They looked at him and said the boy was dead. One of the mercenaries shouted in frustration that they had wasted their time and cursed at him, then swung his sword sharply, cutting the body. Then he ordered the others to cut off the head, and they accepted the command, saying it was time to move on. The group left the crime scene, leaving Razel's body in the middle of a narrow, dark alley. Soon, deep night fell, and a great moon rose over the dark castle. Razel looked at the building, guessing it was probably a demon's castle. 2 guards stood by the main gate when suddenly someone approached, and they shouted for the stranger to stop. The guards blocked his path with spears, ordering him to stay put and calling him a man. The boy was surprised, and they asked what he was doing there. Razel said he wanted to speak with the Demon King and asked to be led to him, while the guards exchanged doubtful glances. They pointed their spears at him again, warning him not to joke around, adding some harsh words, and one asked if he really thought a person could just casually see the Demon King. Razel raised his hands in a calming gesture and sincerely apologized for the sudden visit, adding that he would schedule a proper business meeting next time, which surprised the guards greatly. They shouted that no one would ever be granted a business meeting just to talk with the Demon King, but one guard pointed to his clothes, insisting that he was a hero. Pushing the spear away from his face, Razel confirmed he was a hero but added that the king had banished him, leaving the guards stunned by the confession. The young man continued dramatically, saying that agents of the king had nearly attacked him that very morning, leaving the guards shocked to hear about the assassins. Razel spoke with regret about what it means to be human, and added that after everything he's been through, he doesn't find it strange to side with the Demon King, then asked if they agreed with him. One of the guards pointed his spear at him again, saying it was just like before when another hero said, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend," and they vowed not to make that mistake again. Razel realized this was a problem. He thought he might have to use mind-washing magic, but instead he decided to change the question. He pointed to the top of the castle and asked if that miserable barrier on the tower was the one, leaving the guards frozen in surprise. One asked confusedly what he had just said, while the other snapped irritably if he had called the barrier pathetic. The furious guard shouted, demanding how dare anyone insult the carefully built, all-powerful, and universal barrier of the Demon Lord, while the second guard grew worried and tried to stop him. Razel smiled contentedly and thanked the guards, realizing he was exactly where he needed to be. The guard froze, realizing he'd slipped up, but quickly masked it, saying it didn't matter, and added that if Razel thought he could get through the barrier, he'd be glad to see it happen. Razel winked, waved his finger, and thought that a barrier of this level wouldn't need powerful teleportation magic. Then a seal appeared beneath his feet. He told the guards that they'd meet again, then his body slowly began to fade into the air, leaving the guards in disbelief. His body faded away until it completely vanished, while the guards watched in stunned silence. The particle broke down into tiny molecules that quickly moved toward the tall tower, where its body reappeared. He moved forward, knowing these were the Demon King's chambers, and had already decided what to do next when he heard someone calling him. The girl on the throne pointed at him with surprise, and asked who he was. Razel glanced at her and thought she must be at least 100 times stronger than the gate guards, and looked like a seasoned fighter. The girl cried out in surprise, asking why a person was here, unable to believe it, and wondering if the barrier really hadn't worked. Razel replied that if she was the one who created it, he had something to say. He asked if he should call her the Princess of Darkness, and the girl, confused, asked him to repeat what he had just said. Then she smiled with satisfaction, confirming she really was the Princess of Darkness, and asked who he was and why he was there. Razel apologized for passing through her barrier without permission, which made the girl exclaim in surprise. He said he would hate to damage what she had worked hard on, but since the barrier was unharmed, he just asked for her forgiveness. The princess awkwardly replied that the very idea of breaking the barrier sounded utterly absurd. She stood up, trying to figure out who was in front of her, feeling uneasy not knowing his intentions, when suddenly the young man placed his hand on his chest. Razel introduced himself, explaining that he was summoned to this world as a hero, but was later cast out and now belongs to no side. He added that he came to ask her about this world, which completely confused her. Looking at the Princess of Darkness, he said he would ask one last time if she would answer his question. And at that moment, dark energy surrounded her and her face grew stern. A seal flared up beneath the princess's feet, and she shouted fiercely for him not to joke with her. Razel glanced at the seal below and thought he might have chosen the wrong way to meet. He raised his hand, forming a small seal, and the wall beside him exploded the next moment, triggering the princess's attack. She shouted angrily, calling him a bold fool. Razel calmly defended himself, believing there was no proof he came here by choice, rather than as a hero. The dark princess, standing amid the rubble and dust, smiled, admitting he was quite clever. The young man looked at her, thinking about what to do next. At that moment, he heard a noise. 2 demons rushed into the hall, and the princess anxiously asked if he was all right. The demons noticed an uninvited guest and stopped. One of them looked at Razel and asked who this boy was. The Princess of Darkness warned to be careful, adding that her attacks don't affect him. Razel thought their strength was about 80% of the princess's own power. He shouted that their attacks wouldn't work either, but the demoness calmed him down, saying they were the royal guard and, no matter what, their main mission was to destroy him. He looked around and decided it was probably best not to show his recklessness, but killing those 2 would be a step against the princess. Razel raised his hand, aware that his movement might be seen as a threat, and waved it toward the demons, making them flinch. He created a great seal, determined to make them believe that peaceful talks were the better way. In the next moment, the demon and demoness froze in shock, while the Princess of Darkness panicked and rushed to Jack and Zarina with a cry. Zarina gasped in surprise as a red streak of blood appeared on her neck, while Razel was doing something with the seal. At that very moment, a stream of energy wrapped around the princess's servants, healing the wounds on their necks and starting to close them. Zarina sighed in confusion, not understanding what had happened, while Jack, touching his neck, said he was sure he had just been beheaded. The dark princess, tears in her eyes, asked if they had just been reborn, and Razel replied he never intended to kill them. Surprised, the girl then spoke about her servants' necks. Razel sighed, saying they were overreacting, while the demons stayed silent in shock. The boy noticed they really thought they were going to die, just because their heads were flying through the air. The Dark Princess pointed at him and shouted angrily that he was the strangest of all, since no spell had ever allowed anyone to survive losing their head. Razel awkwardly asked if politics had dulled their understanding of magic, but then decided not to push the topic, adding that no one would criticize the Dark Princess. Zarina was outraged and ordered him not to be rude, reminding him that Her Majesty is the Demon Lord and the most powerful. Here, the lady herself intervened, closing her eyes and ordering Zarina to be silent. Razel listened quietly as the princess said it was clear this boy was beyond their understanding, and ordered them to stop speaking in that tone. Zarina fell silent, and Jack turned to Her Majesty. The Princess of Darkness approached the young man, confirming if she understood correctly that Razel had come to learn about this world. She smiled lightly, a bit nervously, and said he could ask anything he wanted. Razel replied that he was glad she was finally ready to talk. Zarina jumped in, excitedly pointing out that they still weren't sure if he was an enemy, and suggested things could change, but the princess smiled and interrupted, saying time would tell, so there was no point in arguing. The princess's servants looked at her with concern, but she declared that instead of getting more bruises, it was better to focus on finding even a glimmer of hope. She admitted that she was the first to attack him and added that she feels if they talk things through, he could become their ally. The Dark Princess smiled and said there was no need to worry, so the servants should wait outside. Razel sighed with relief, thinking that although it had been tough, things now seemed to be falling into place. After she spoke, Jack and Zarina exchanged glances, nodded, and bowed, confirming they would carry out their mistress's wishes. An awkward silence filled the hall as the princess sat on the throne, crossing her legs. She looked at Razel with a sly smile and said he could ask any questions, and the boy smiled politely in return, thanking her for the opportunity. Kneeling down, he said he had heard that the human race was about to fall under the rule of a rapidly growing demon race and asked if it was true. The princess calmly replied that it was not. Razel asked skeptically what exactly was wrong with those words, and the girl sighed deeply, replying that everything was completely wrong. First of all, demons haven't grown stronger for hundreds of years. In fact, they've been weakening, and they never tried to dominate humans because it's humans who impose unfavorable conditions on them. The princess quickly pulled out a neatly tied document, threw it to Razel, and ordered him to read it. The boy caught the papers with surprise and asked what it was. She explained that it was a contract between humans and demons, and Razel immediately felt a royal magic radiating from him. The girl calmly said he was holding the original, and Razel, surprised, asked if it was true, receiving confirmation. He unfolded the document, furrowed his brow in concentration, and began to read. It was stated that if a person commits a crime on the demon border, they are judged by human law, but if a demon is harmed while among humans, the humans are not held responsible. Impressed, Razel asked how she could have signed such a foolish contract. The girl's face darkened as she explained that a few generations ago, a hero killed the Demon King. She explained that the strongest demon always became the Demon Lord, and on the day he died, it became clear that no one could defeat the hero. The princess added that if they hadn't met these conditions, the hero would have taken the throne and killed her, so there was simply no choice. Razel nodded, showing he understood her logic, but fell silent when he noticed her hands trembling, then drifted into his own thoughts. He couldn't understand why he was summoned when such a mighty hero was already here, and guessed that a new one was called each time the previous one died, though the idea seemed quite strange. Admiring the princess, he politely asked for permission to ask one more question, and she straightened up and agreed. Razel asked if the hero was still alive, and the girl looked a bit surprised. She took a deep breath and said yes, he was alive, adding that she would have destroyed the contract long ago if it weren't for him. Razel handed her the contract and asked why he was even summoned in the first place. She asked suspiciously if he had been kicked out before, and the guy confirmed it, not seeing what was so strange about that. The princess smiled and said he was just lucky to have narrowly escaped death, leaving Razel confused and asking what she meant. The girl explained that he was brought into this world only to be used as a sacrifice, and upon hearing this, he suddenly turned pale. Under the moonlight, a heavy silence fell over the Demon King's castle, as if time itself had stopped for him. The princess said coldly that people like him are called victims. Razel, turning pale, asked what that meant and requested a detailed explanation, while the girl covered her mouth with her hand. The Princess of Darkness lowered her eyes and began her story, saying it all started about 600 years ago with the first summoning of a hero. According to her, he probably wasn't that strong back then and couldn't match the 4 heavenly kings, Jack and Zarina's fathers. Razel was surprised to learn that the most powerful were actually the parents of the 2 people he had recently shown his skills to. The girl continued, saying that all the following heroes had roughly the same strength, and the higher-ranking people were thrilled, so they declared her the goddess who brings forth the strongest heroes. Razel sighed, Noting that it all led to the current events, thinking how troublesome it was, the princess agreed, then asked in surprise if he had known it all along. The young man paused, thinking that someone in this world could very well have created such a magical artifact. It seemed more believable than the other theories. He asked if the goddess was involved in creating these artifacts. The princess, a bit surprised, then looked down irritably and said it was obvious. Razel concluded that the first hero was much stronger than the first demon king back then, and hearing this, the princess clenched her teeth fiercely. She explained that together with the first hero, they defeated demons and then kept summoning new ones to fight the monsters and demons of this world. But when the heroes reached their limit, they let the first hero absorb them. Then it all repeated over and over, and now the hero is stronger than ever before. She conveyed the king's words that they had no idea a new demon king could appear, which is why they created the strongest hero, and Razel thought, surprisingly, that was easy to imagine. The princess took a deep breath, leaned back on her throne, and said that was all the information she knew. Razel replied seriously that he understood everything. If that's true, then the goddess and that hero are his enemies, and he came here seeking a favor from the goddess. At the same time, he clearly understood that this woman was willing to sacrifice her assistant, so that option was off the table. He stood up and asked the princess for permission to verify her words. She was a bit taken aback, but quickly composed herself and agreed. Razel raised his hand, and instantly a neat information window appeared as he prepared to gather evidence using satellite analysis. The princess watched this unusual power closely, thinking it was like detection magic, but she had no idea what he was trying to achieve. On the screen, Razel saw neat, marked paths and noted that their souls no longer resembled human ones at all. He quietly said he found traces of a magical artifact and the first hero in the palace, which means the princess's words are true. The girl was amazed and asked how he managed to gather intelligence about the palace, as it seemed unbelievable. Razel calmly replied that it's not difficult if you have everything you need for the analysis. The princess leaned back on the throne again, noting how wonderful it was, and casually mentioned that she wished she had the same freedom, amazed that Razel seemed to face no obstacles at all. She pouted and said she had felt from the very start that he didn't need her at all, then asked if that was true. Razel calmly confirmed it, but added that if it weren't for her, he wouldn't have guessed the first hero was still in the palace. He looked away and said he would have never known they wanted to make him a victim. Razel sincerely thanked the princess for sharing her story. The girl looked away shyly, her cheeks flushing, and said it was nothing important. Razel thought to himself, if he met the goddess, he could convince her that she had no choice but to send him home, knowing this was the best way to unsettle that terrible person. He thought the first hero might become a hostage, but knew it wouldn't help the Dark Princess. Then suddenly, he gasped and shouted that he understood everything. The young man turned to the princess with determination, and startled by his suddenness, she asked what was wrong and what he wanted. Razel smiled slyly and asked if she would like to be the one to defeat the first hero herself. The girl froze, thinking this man must have sparked the same conspiracy in the past, and she added that destroying him had been her lifelong dream. As the heir of all previous rulers, she simply couldn't pass up this chance. The princess looked at the young man seriously and firmly said she definitely wanted it, and Razel smiled, saying that meant everything was settled. He asked how she felt about his offer and added that he would personally teach her. The princess looked clearly flustered, but Razel assured her that she would surpass the hero. The girl pouted slightly and shyly asked why he was going so far. Razel closed his eyes and calmly said he just wants to return to his world, and to do that, he has to make the right choices. The Princess of Darkness looked at him in surprise and said, "So you have a goal too?" Then awkwardly asked why he thought she could become stronger than the hero, catching him off guard. Razel replied seriously that her strength was only 1/5 of his own, but with some effort she could reach that level. The girl looked doubtful, saying even 1/5 of it sounded complicated, and Razel stood up, asking if she was the strongest among her people. He added that if she started training, everything would work out, and with a smile, he noted it would get easier once she discovered her weak spots, which made the princess mutter something thoughtfully. She stood up and stepped closer, saying that if he insisted, she agreed, her eyes full of determination. Razel smiled, noticing that she was deliberately making this choice. The Dark Princess and the hero shook hands. She said she was glad to work together. Razel warned they'd use teleportation and asked everyone to get ready, while the princess nervously asked if they could do it without him. She grabbed her face in panic, but Razel asked if she knew a place to train, which snapped her back to reality. He explained that he wanted to see her in action, and after a moment's thought, the princess said there was a suitable square a few kilometers away. Razel spread the map before her, and the girl pointed to a spot, saying it was somewhere around here. He replied that he hoped they would manage to get there. He put his arm around her shoulder and told her to hold on tight. The princess, a bit nervous, asked if they could really cover such a distance, and Razel smiled, reassuring her they would. A large seal flared up beneath their feet. The princess screamed in panic, saying she wasn't mentally ready, as their bodies quickly dissolved into a stream of particles heading toward the designated place, and she let out a loud cry. Soon they arrived at a place where almost no one was around. The princess barely stood on her feet, bent over and breathing heavily with her head bowed. She was exhausted and thought it was truly terrifying, amazed by the magic that had traveled such a distance instantly. Razel awkwardly apologized. She stood up, gave a weak smile, said it was nothing serious, but asked what that thing was. Razel explained that it was a magical barrier mirage. The princess, surprised, asked what that meant, and he smiled, saying it just looked like they were doing exercises, which only confused her more. He smiled and said that no matter how embarrassing her defeat might be, no one would see it, so she could stay calm. The princess, though displeased, sincerely thanked him for his concern, thinking it was just his imagination. Razel continued, saying that, in his opinion, she was already ready for battle. The princess was a bit surprised but turned around and confidently confirmed it. She looked confidently at the relaxed guy and said that this time they would fight with full force. Razel smiled and said they could begin, while the princess looked at him with determination. She got ready and started thinking about how he would attack, deciding she had to stop him but also considering that it might be better to let the first strike pass. At that very moment, the young man standing before her suddenly vanished, leaving her utterly bewildered. She opened her eyes wide in shock and exclaimed, "Where did he go?" The dark princess sensed the magic filling the air and realized it was likely dispersal magic. Blindly attacking without knowing the enemy's position was pointless. So she decided to focus, knowing that even in distraction, there was a place where the magic was stronger. Suddenly, she snapped her eyes wide open and clenched her teeth, having noticed something. The girl quickly spun around and cast a spell, shouting that he was here, when suddenly a small stone hit her head, making her cry out softly. She looked down at the stone that had fallen nearby, wondering what it was. The princess took a closer look and realized it was just a regular ball. Rubbing her head, she thought about how painful it must be, when suddenly Razel appeared behind her, explaining that the ball would disappear in 3 seconds and suggested she try to dodge it. She spun around sharply, thinking it was teleportation magic, but Razel smiled and said he hadn't used anything except a boost, leaving the girl amazed by what she heard. She clenched her fist in anger. Razel smiled, saying he expected something interesting from her and encouraged her, while the princess, annoyed, thought about how she would kill that bold fellow. She bared her teeth fiercely, vowing to dodge for sure. Razel flashed past, and at that moment, the bullet struck her head again, making her cry out. A good amount of time had passed since training began, and as the sun dipped toward the horizon, the princess finally managed to swiftly knock down the flying ball. She was sweaty and tired, but felt she had defended herself well. Razel praised her and suggested she try attacking, which took her by surprise. The princess decided it was her turn to attack. She started watching Razel's movements, but quickly realized her eyes couldn't keep up, and although he slowed down a bit, it didn't make the task any easier. She took a deep breath and decided to try a different approach. Razel immediately noticed the change. The Princess of Darkness spread her arms and closed her eyes, surrounded by countless magical seals. Razel realized these were fiery arrows, cursed, and decided to put up an extra barrier. He snapped his tongue sharply as he turned around. The princess, summoning all her strength, fired sharply to the side, shouting an order to hit the target. She was breathing hard but smiling broadly, asking how he felt about it. Razel was confused, and nearby debris started falling as he stared in shock at the huge hole where his barrier had been destroyed. Exhausted but happy, the princess joyfully exclaimed that she had finally succeeded. Right after that, she collapsed to the ground, saying she was terribly tired, while the barrier kept breaking down, and Razel wondered if she really thought his defense was that weak. He decided he needed to put in more effort to recreate the ancient magic of old wizards, refusing to show any weakness and determined to prove his skill. While the princess was resting, Razel approached and offered his hand, a gesture that took her by surprise. She accepted the help and, smiling, asked if they could start over. Razel, considering her boundaries, agreed with the same smile. He announced that this time they'd start with the moving barrier. The princess, shocked, burst out shouting that she needed a break again. They took a break, and she asked what that barrier was. Razel explained that he would create a small dome, and her task was to destroy it with magic. The princess challenged him, asking if he really thought she couldn't handle it, and Razel, creating a barrier around himself, replied, "Then prove it." He was surrounded by a dome, and with a smile he said this shield blocks all magical attacks. The princess smiled warmly, thinking he was a bit too confident, and said she would keep his words in mind. She created a massive seal and shouted fiercely that he had underestimated her power. Midi unleashed a powerful strike right at Razel, who was protected by a barrier. The attack hit the barrier but didn't break through. The princess, shocked, asked if it really was blocking the magic. She stood silently, watching as he didn't even flinch. Razel took off his armor and asked if she thought he was joking. She snapped back, annoyed, asking why he was so bold, since failing on the first try isn't the end of the world. The Dark Princess turned away in hurt. He called out, asking her not to frown, and with tears in her eyes, she asked what he wanted. Razel hesitated awkwardly, then apologized, explaining he still didn't know her name, to which she irritably pointed out that he was only asking now. The girl agreed, admitting she was partly to blame. She introduced herself as Mercia, the Princess of Darkness, and thanked the boy for his willingness to help. Razel shyly thanked them for their trust, genuinely happy, and said that if they were serious, it was time to move on to the ruthless techniques. He explained that the girl's magical power was very strong, but her technique was weak, making her attacks ineffective. The princess, confused, admitted she didn't understand and asked for a simpler explanation. Razel suggested imagining magic as a pump, power as the thickness of the hose, and technique as water pressure. The output could be a weak or strong stream, with the magic circle representing skills. And now, he hoped, it was clear why the attacks weren't working, to which Mercia agreed. He gave an example of a person and a dragon. The dragon is much stronger, so victory seems obvious. But with the right technique, the person can make the dragon fall under a precise attack and become the strongest mage. Razel summed up that she needed to learn how to channel and focus her magic, promising to teach her everything so she could defeat the most powerful demon. Mercia replied that she was ready and asked where to begin. He said they would first learn how to create a three-dimensional magical dome. The princess eagerly repeated his words, while Razel thought there would be a lot of work ahead, and noticed she still didn't know some of the details. He explained that domes come in different types. Flat ones are weaker, while three-dimensional ones are so strong their power is infinite, and added that ruthless magic must become three-dimensional. The princess paused, surprised to learn it was a whole science, and asked if that meant her power would grow without limits. Razel nodded with satisfaction. Mercia asked skeptically how she could learn this quickly, and if the training could be shortened. Razel replied that it would take some work since he wasn't born with this magic either. It took a lot of time to get results. Mercia grumbled she wasn't going to wait that long and called him boring. She asked why he agreed to train her and added that his real goal was to return to his own world, so why not just kill the hero and get what he needed instead of complicating things with training? Razel partly agreed. He explained that he had two reasons: to get the information he needed, and to thank her for helping him see the truth, then added something more. Razel said he wished that after the victory, she would join him as an adventurer in his world, which took the Princess of Darkness by surprise. He promised to give her some time to think it over, and Mercia asked confusedly what that meant. Razel explained that in his world, there's an enemy that's incredibly hard to defeat, and his own strength isn't enough. If they join forces, they might stand a chance. He'll help her, and she'll help him, while Mercia asked if he was really going to fight a creature twice as strong as himself. He said that after seeing her determination and resilience, he realized there was a chance. She added that it takes a lot of practice, so there's no time to waste. Mercia agreed and urged to get started. She declared with determination that she would become the greatest mage, master creating a three-dimensional dome, and her power would know no bounds. Together, they would overcome enemies and help each other gain strength and truth. Razel said he liked her mood and that it was great. At that moment, Mercia asked if she could say something else, and when he asked what, she admitted she had a younger sister who was just as strong as she was. But recently she fell ill with a mysterious disease. If Mercia leaves the kingdom and travels to another world with him, she wants her sister to become the next Princess of Darkness. She's weakened and can't fight, but no one matches her skill in ruling. The girl added that maybe in Razel's world there's an antidote that could restore his sister's strength. Razel thought he didn't know much about medicine, but found the illness intriguing. He promised to help and do everything he could to find the cure. The princess happily asked if it was true and thanked him sincerely. She stood up, urging them to head to the castle immediately to quickly inform her sister. Razel agreed and asked to skip the strong drinks this time, unlike last time, and Mercia awkwardly replied that she didn't drink at all. Meanwhile, outside it was already deep into the night, with a large moon hanging low on the horizon. A girl was sitting on the couch reading a book when suddenly a portal opened right in front of her, leaving her completely stunned. She was frightened by the distortion of space, thinking she was under attack. But the next moment, Mercia and Razel appeared in the room. The boy apologized for being late, and the girl called her younger sister with relief. Mercia knelt down and apologized for the scare. Her sister said she just didn't recognize her magic, then asked who the man was, to which Mercia smiled mysteriously, knowing her sister would be surprised. The Princess of Darkness introduced Raziel as one of the strongest warriors from another world, who instantly neutralized her magic and broke through her barrier, noting that one of his spells would clearly demonstrate this. Raziel asked if she was exaggerating, and Mercia awkwardly admitted it was just a little. Her sister sighed in surprise, acknowledging that he truly was a unique person. Mercia grabbed her sister's hands and said she brought him here hoping he could heal her, while the girl was utterly surprised by the young man's unexpected arrival. The princess reassured her sister not to worry, promising that everything would be fine, and even if the boy couldn't help, they would still face it with a smile, suggesting they just give him a chance to try to heal her. The princess's younger sister replied hesitantly that if her sister trusted this man, then she had no objections either. Raziel smiled, thinking about the strong bond and genuine trust between the sisters, and when Mercia called him over, he agreed, saying he wouldn't waste the moment. He sat down in front of the girl, greeted her warmly, and said he was glad to meet her, assuring her there was no need to worry because he wouldn't cause any pain. The girl thanked him and said she trusted him completely, while the princess asked him to be careful, as her sister was more sensitive than she was. Raziel said he understood. Mercia thought irritably how clever he was. Then she asked what illness her sister had and anxiously wondered if it was caused by the magical pulse. Raziel explained that her body couldn't handle the intense flow of magical energy due to its high concentration, making her magic and health unstable. Mercia listened carefully and then asked if it was a serious condition. The guy assured them there's no need to worry because there's a remedy that stabilizes energy flow and restores strength to normal. It's specially made to reduce excess energy and improve health, but it takes a few days to start working. He added that once the drug enters the body, its effects will last a lifetime. Mercia was shocked and asked if it was true. Then the guy handed her a capsule and suggested she take it, and she agreed. She looked at her sister with worry, but Mercia smiled warmly and said everything was fine because they trusted Raziel. The youngest princess nodded, quickly popped the capsule into her mouth, and swallowed. The girl exhaled calmly, and Mercia eagerly asked if the medicine had started working, to which her sister replied that there were no changes. Mercia shouted angrily at the boy, asking why there were no results and if the medicine was expired, while Raziel covered his ears and reminded her that the effect would only show after a few days. He repeated that they needed to wait, and the girl agreed. Raziel touched the stone on her forehead with his finger and said the medicine should be given exactly 1 week, and she agreed. The princess's sister looked at her hands in surprise and said her power flow had become much calmer. Mercia happily exclaimed that was wonderful, and the girl agreed. Mercia hugged her younger sister with tears in her eyes, saying she would definitely get better now. The girl happily agreed, and Raziel smiled, thinking yet another problem was solved. The girl glanced at her hands once more, then firmly said they could begin. Mercia, though nervous, agreed, while Raziel watched silently. The girl began filling the vase with magic until it broke down into its components. She happily said she succeeded, and Mercia was amazed that her sister had separated the vase's alloy into individual minerals. Raziel noticed that now even the most difficult spells would come to her easily. The girl smiled brightly and said it was wonderful because now she could work with simple magic. Mercia started crying, saying it was wonderful because her sister would be cured of her terrible illness, then wiped away her tears and asked her to calm down a little. Raziel explained that the magical substance causing the illness is different from the usual kind, but this remedy can help anyone, human or magical creature. Mercia then asked what might happen next. The young man smiled and said it was time to distribute the medicine to all the soldiers to strengthen the army. Mercia asked in surprise if they would be able to produce them in large quantities. Raziel admitted that at first, these drugs were distributed among children in poor countries, and the company produced too many in the first batch, so now they are quite common. The girl asked if this was just a way to get rid of excess stock. The princess smiled and said it didn't matter, as long as it was useful, and Raziel agreed, saying it suited her well. Mercia was thrilled, and exclaimed that they needed to give them to the people right away, because she would be back soon. Meanwhile, Raziel and Shishil were left alone, and the girl asked if he wanted to get closer to her sister. The young man paused to think, but Shishil interrupted him, saying it would be very difficult, and he looked up in surprise. She explained that her sister was the most influential person in the country, trusted by everyone, and that she herself was just not as good as Mercy in that regard. Raziel wanted to respond, but she added that it was true. Suddenly, the girl smiled brightly and said that if he truly needed her sister, and Mercia agreed too, she wouldn't let anything stand in her way. Shishil smiled brightly and said she would do anything for her sister. while Razel narrowed his eyes and smiled gently, saying he was counting on her completely. Then he turned to Shishiel and asked if she had any political experience. She was surprised, laughed awkwardly, and admitted she was very embarrassed because she had none. Razel took a sip of tea and said that in that case, she should make use of this. He handed her some papers, explaining that whenever she wanted to learn from professionals in the field, this would be her tool to grow into a true expert, a so-called training simulator. After the conversation, an awkward silence fell as they stared at each other, unsure what to say, until Mercia burst in happily, smiling and announcing she was back and had sorted everything out. Shishiel glanced at her sister and greeted her a bit awkwardly. The Dark Princess hesitated, but then asked if anything had happened while she was away. Razel placed his hand on Mercia's shoulder and noticed she had already returned. She went pale, so he sat her down on the couch and explained he needed to extract some of her memories, which surprised her, but she agreed without hesitation. The girl settled in calmly, waiting for Razel's next move, but suddenly realized his words and loudly asked what he meant and which memories he intended to pull out. Razel asked her to calm down and not faint, as all her practical experience would be recorded in this training simulator. She asked if that meant the magical device was using her memory to create the learning materials, and Mercia confirmed that it was true. Razel took out a few items and confirmed her suspicion. The girl clipped one to her hair but said she still didn't understand anything, so Razel asked if she was ready to feel the difference between worlds. Mercia confidently said she was ready and everything was fine, and Razel smiled, praising her excellent preparation. He touched the device and said they could start. Then a message appeared on his equipment about receiving magical memory crystals, and the girl focused intently. She heard that now she could have it all, and right then, something started to invade her mind. Shishiel nervously glanced at her sister. Suddenly, a message announced the completion of the Earth and Demon Control Simulator installation. The girl removed the device from her hair and asked if it was done, to which Razel confirmed and suggested trying it out. Shishiel hesitantly agreed. Razel told her to press the red magic stone in the center, and when her image appeared on the screen, she was surprised. The system asked how to respond to the current situation. Mercia hesitated because it involved a famine from 2 years ago and she needed to choose option 3 in training mode. Shishiel was surprised but said she couldn't predict any improvement for sure, so she decided to switch to mode 2, while Mercia watched silently. The system confirmed it was the right choice, and Shishiel happily exclaimed that mode 2 was working well. Mercia proudly claimed she was the one who implemented this system. Shishiel enthusiastically said it was wonderful and exactly what they expected from her sister, and Mercia was pleased. Razel came over and remarked that this stimulator is truly amazing. Shishiel agreed, adding that it helps a lot, then looked at the princess and said she would try it too. Mercia gently patted her head and said she was counting on her, and they were both happy. The next day they gathered together, and Razel announced that the second phase of training was starting to surpass the bold opponent she had faced, asking if she was ready, to which the girl confidently replied she was in perfect shape and trusted him. She said she needed a private room for training, and the guy agreed right away. He ordered them to use a device to release magical energy this time, and the girl, noticing the figurine on the table, asked what it was. Razel explained that this magical device draws energy from the environment, leaving only a small portion behind, causing magical power to leave living beings and dissipate, so the concentration of magical elements stays stable. Mercia asked if it would harm the body, and he replied that if nothing changed, the magic wouldn't be enough, and she would die. The girl was shocked. Razel laughed, saying this usually doesn't happen and there's no need to worry. Then she asked what he planned to do with the device. The young man said he wanted to keep the stronger magical power inside his body and learn to control it using his own body, which surprised her. He explained that he doesn't rely on complex magical environments and that usually, controlling simple magical power only requires focus. Then he suggested she try lighting a candle with a long flame. The girl replied awkwardly that she understood, looking noticeably tense. Mercia eagerly approached the candle, confidently saying she could light it easily, and asked the boy to watch, but the flame instantly went out, leaving her staring at the wick in surprise. The Dark Princess focused, trying to encourage herself by thinking it should be easy for a demon. Razel watched closely, but the candle still wouldn't light, and when the attempt failed, the boy smiled while anger surged through the girl. Mercia shouted angrily at the candle, demanding it light faster, and just then a small spark flickered on the wick, making her shout with joy. And the light went out immediately, which upset Mercia, making her press her lips together in frustration. She cried out in despair, asking what it all meant, then wondered if she had exhausted her power during the magic and admitted she might not be cut out for this, to which Razel smiled and asked if she was already giving up. The girl stood up, her face wet with tears. She was silent at first, then firmly declared she wouldn't stop until she succeeded. Razel smiled, closed his eyes, and confirmed that everything was going exactly as he expected, while Mercia eagerly exclaimed that she would do it. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. Razel opened it to find Shishil holding tea, but he motioned for her to be quiet. Shashia peeked into the room and looked where he pointed, seeing her sister focused on training. At that moment, Mercia grabbed her head and let out an irritated scream, while Razel and Shishil just smiled, watching her. The younger sister quickly handed the tray with tea to the surprised boy, and then went into the room. Mercia, still upset about her failure, suddenly noticed her younger sister looking at her with warmth. The sisters started doing their exercises side by side, while Razel took away the tray with tea that the girl had left for him. After some time, the candle the princess was holding suddenly burst into a bright flame. Mercia looked at her with awe and surprise, while Shishil and Razel were also amazed. With a joyful shout about her success, the princess rushed to hug her younger sister. Razel thoughtfully noted that for a first try it was great. The magic held, and the flame didn't go out. Mercia triumphantly reminded everyone that she said she wouldn't give up. Tired, the princess lay down on the table, admitting how exhausted she was. And Razel replied that since she managed this, they would gradually increase the difficulty of the spells, adding that she could ask any time if she wanted to learn combat magic. Soon, he said, the girl will be able to use teleportation magic to enter the competition arena. Mercia said she first wants to learn unconsciousness magic. Shashil happily exclaimed that next time she will definitely teleport, and Mercia noted that her sister has truly become stronger. After some time had passed, they returned to the competition arena where the girl resumed her training. Mercia folded her hands and slowly began gathering energy between them, growing stronger as Razel watched closely. Looking at the burst of energy, the boy said it would be enough. Mercia released the built-up energy, which quickly faded away. Smiling, she said it was perfect, and noted that she had executed both the appearance and disappearance flawlessly. Razel praised her for reaching this level in less than a month, then decided it was time to turn off the device. Mercia asked if they should hold a magic test now that the goal had been achieved. Razel smiled and said he was just thinking about that, then began explaining to the curious girl what her next workout would be like. Suddenly, a barrier began to form at his feet, and a protective wall rose up in front of Razel. He looked at the girl and said it was the creation of three-dimensional magical barriers. Mercia asked in surprise if they were really talking about three-dimensional magical barriers. Razel explained that their base is on the surface and that they are also called multi-layered. The girl asked if he meant protective barriers, and he confirmed that layering two-dimensional barriers creates a three-dimensional one. The guy added that in practice, 3D barriers need to appear instantly, because building them piece by piece takes time and they fall apart at the slightest breeze. He looked at the girl challengingly, asking if she could handle it, and Mercia replied with the same smile, telling him not to doubt it. She kept telling herself that all it took was a try, and it would work. Focusing, Mercia began to create the barrier. Small pieces quickly came together to form a tall wall, and Razel noted that her focus and precision were flawless. In just a few moments, Mercia happily exclaimed she had done it. Razel said it was pretty good, especially for a start, and the girl proudly reminded him that she was the Princess of Darkness. The boy asked if she minded testing the strength of her barrier, and the princess looked at him with surprise. At that very moment, a powerful explosion thundered behind the wall, making her scream, and when the smoke cleared, Mercia asked in surprise if he had really protected her. She touched the barrier, noting it had no scratches. Razel explained that multi-layered magical barriers are much stronger than two-dimensional ones and asked if she could feel that power. The princess said this magical barrier was amazing, and she even felt like she had created such power herself. Razel replied that their goal was three-dimensional barriers, so they needed to add more layers. Mercia agreed enthusiastically, saying that's exactly what should be done. She proudly ordered Razel to check out the powerful barrier she had created. The boy praised her, saying it could easily withstand an attack, while Mercia fell to the floor, joyfully exclaiming that she had succeeded and marveling at the result. Lying on the floor, she tiredly said it required immense focus, and Razel reached out his hand, telling her she had done an excellent job. He added that starting tomorrow, they would seriously begin studying three-dimensional magic cubes and mastering magic. But for now, the princess should rest. The girl stood up. She confidently replied that she didn't need a break because she had no time to waste and had to learn the basics of magic as soon as possible. Razel understood her determination and noted that it was exactly what he expected from her. With a smile, he warned her to remember, or he would be very strict. The princess said she understood and asked him to start right away. An hour later, Razel approached the girl, reminded her about the special training spot she mentioned, and asked if this was the place. Mercia smiled and confirmed it. The Dark Princess smiled as she looked out over the view, explaining that it was a food storage near the Demon Kingdom, located on a vast plantation, and added that the landscape here was incredibly beautiful. She explained that managing such a vast area supplying the kingdom with agricultural products is challenging because it rarely rains, so high-ranking demons summon rain once or twice a year to protect the fields and crops. Razel was surprised by how much rainfall this area gets, and realized why the girl chose to train here. He closed his eyes with a smile, saying that wasn't the only reason Mercia brought him here, and asked if he was right, or if there was something else she wanted to say. Mercia admitted she wants to try summoning rain herself using a multi-layered magical barrier to irrigate the fields. Razel asked in surprise if she developed the method herself, and she confirmed but confessed it's her first time trying it in practice, so she's not sure it will work. Razel understood that she wanted him to back her up for this. Mercia replied that she was afraid that instead of rain, she might accidentally cause an explosion and harm the kingdom. She became very embarrassed, but Razel thought she must have trained hard to create the barrier, and respected her for it, knowing the princess truly wants to help her people. He suggested starting by practicing creating a simple magical barrier before moving on to summoning rain, and Mercia gladly agreed. The princess began creating a barrier while Razel watched closely, explaining that the formula for boosting crop yields, promoting growth, and stabilizing nutrients could actually trigger rainfall. He advised Mercia to start by drawing a simple circle, and then slowly introduce the formula, assuring her that he would stop immediately if anything went wrong, and she quickly agreed. After that, Mercia calmed down and focused, thinking only about the need for complete concentration. The girl was quickly surrounded by rings of energy, and Razel, watching closely, was confident she could build the barrier and control the magic. He thought creating the magic circle was an impressive skill, told her it looked great, and suggested activating it with magic, to which Mercia quickly replied that she understood. The Dark Princess began slowly pouring in her power, and the circle expanded until it became enormous. Suddenly, the first drops fell to the ground, and rain poured down from the sky, instantly catching the attention of the townspeople. People began to shout that this was the blessed rain of the Princess of Darkness. They noticed the magical circle was especially large this year and thanked her loudly, to which the girl smiled and replied that she had made it happen. Then suddenly she noticed something and quickly turned to the boy, asking what had happened. Razel smiled and said it was perfection, adding that this year's harvest would be bigger than usual, and the girl suddenly dropped to her knees. Tears sparkled in the Princess of Darkness's eyes as she quietly said it was all right. Razel noted that even during the toughest workouts, she never let her tears show. Mercia started talking about how they no longer had to rely on humans, feeling embarrassed to cry in front of the man, while the guy exclaimed in surprise. Razel asked confusedly if they really had to take from others, and despite the food supplies, he checked when they ran out. Mercia replied distrustfully that they had to copy them just to survive. Razel breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that if he had been even a little late, things would have been much worse. He said he understood, and the girl added that this year, God was on their side. Mercia lifted her head, noting that the people would no longer go hungry, and calmly looked up at the sky, while the boy confirmed that the harvest would indeed be good. The princess smugly added that she was curious to see the faces of the human merchant exporters, and Razel agreed, though clearly confused. Some time had passed. In the royal capital, officials were busy with their work when one of them, sighing irritably, held up a paper and raised a question. The king shouted angrily about the pitiful sales, reacting to a 95% drop in crop exports, while a frightened man asked what was wrong, only for the king to throw a paper at his feet and call it nonsense. The king kept shouting, demanding an explanation, while the second man, scared, faltered, and hesitated. He explained that recently, when the number of traders dropped, he contacted the demon diplomat directly and learned that since their food self-sufficiency exceeded 100%, they no longer needed imports from humans. The king frowned even more, and the servant realized that if things continued this way, the consequences would be severe. Recalling how an official was once executed for insulting the king, he understood he was in a difficult spot. The king disdainfully remarked that the demon's arrogance knew no bounds, then asked Regis if the 3 summoned heroes were fully equipped. The servant confirmed they were ready, and the king ordered them to storm the demon lord's castle. Regis looked at the king in surprise, trying to clarify, but the king added that they should kill the demon lord and include a clause in the treaty requiring the demon tribes to buy last year's harvest volume. Regis, with respect, reminded them that in their current state, the heroes couldn't defeat the demon lord, and the king gladly acknowledged that he understood perfectly. Then he recalled Article 7, Section 3, which stated that the demon tribe had no right to kill summoned heroes, and Regis admitted with surprise that this was fair. The king declared that the demons would break the treaty by killing the heroes, sparking a full-scale war between humans and demons. and Regis pointed out that the dead heroes could no longer be used for synthesis. The king said the demons were causing trouble and ordered them to be destroyed first, not caring if 1 or 2 heroes died. Regis bowed and asked for forgiveness. The king frowned and waved his hand, saying that if they understood everything, they could leave. Regis agreed and apologized again, while another official also apologized and sighed with relief. The man glanced closely at the scroll beside him and said that demons are foolish. He thought he didn't know their tactics, but he would make sure they understood that no one can stand against the human race. Meanwhile, the man was walking down the corridor when he suddenly overheard a conversation about an attack on the royal castle. He stepped closer, asking if this was the right room, and thought he just heard something about the Demon Lord's castle. Pressing against the door, he admitted that eavesdropping wasn't really his thing. He heard someone order the summoning of heroes to kill them, and send them for synthesis to start a war between humans and demons, and the man recognized the king's voice, realizing the heroes were being used. Walking down the corridor, the man mentally dismissed what he had heard, thinking that if they wanted to kill them, it would have happened long ago. Banzas suddenly stopped and wondered, what if the king truly wants them dead? He cut off the stream of thoughts, gave a slight smile, and decided he had been dwelling too much on suspicions. Meanwhile, in the vast desert, the wind was rising, and Mercia said there really was nothing out here in the middle of nowhere. The Princess of Darkness asked Razel if he really wanted to fight in such a place, and he replied that over the past 6 months they had made great progress, making the usual arena feel too small. Plus, there were no settlements or buildings nearby. Razel smiled and asked if it was time for her to use her power to the fullest, to which Mercia paused for a moment and replied that she understood. The guy suggested a no-rules fight and Mercia agreed, saying this time they had to give it their all. At that moment, a magical circle lit up beneath the girl's feet, and countless weapons appeared behind her. She formed a magical spear and quickly threw it at the boy in an attack. When the spears flew at Razel, he realized they were magical, so a simple defense wouldn't stop them. He used a strong shield that protected him from the strike. The Dark Princess smiled and said that if he kept acting that way, she was ready to take the next hit, then attacked again. Razel thought it was like hurting yourself and decided to use a magnetic counterattack. The girl's attack hit the boy and instantly bounced right back toward her. Mercia asked in shock what it was and cried out in panic that it was impossible. She quickly jumped aside with a look of annoyance, barely avoiding the blow, cursed silently, and let out a relieved sigh. Razel smiled and asked if it was a good idea, then decided it was time to strike back. A thick, dark mist quickly surrounded the girl, surprising her. Mercia covered her face, thinking it was a neurotoxic fog. She coughed lightly, and the boy agreed with her guess. Razel thought she might use the same magical antidote that he had, but the Princess of Darkness smiled with satisfaction as she gathered a ball of energy in her hands. Razel was shocked to realize it was not an antidote at all. Mercia shouted for him to disappear and launched her attack straight at the boy, instantly surrounding him with her power. The Dark Princess looked at Raziel in surprise and asked what that was, to which the boy smiled and asked if that was really all she could do, since he didn't have a single scratch on him. Mercia asked, confused, how that could be possible and whether it had any protective spells on it. Razel smiled and said she could check his magic circle. Mercia glanced at him with displeasure, but suddenly understood something and exclaimed. She shouted that she lost the target mark and that it was unfair. Razel smiled awkwardly and explained that this magic easily changes the target, then laughed and added that it's not suitable for fighting humans because they themselves can become the target. Mercia grabbed her head in frustration and exclaimed that she had rushed into making such a bold move. Razel noticed that forging a magic circle against the hero was impossible, making it extremely effective, which somewhat reassured the girl. He stepped closer and explained that while waiting for the right moment to strike quickly, you can secretly prepare and activate magic that takes time, which carries the risk of losing, but strategically, it's almost perfect. The young man smiled and said that if the girl had been more careful, she would have won, then praised her, and Mercia happily agreed. The Princess of Darkness smiled broadly and said she would do her best, then firmly bumped fists with the boy. After that, Mercia decided to grab a snack and suddenly told Razel she actually enjoyed the workout, which surprised him, so he asked if she was serious, and she confirmed she was. She began saying that learning new things, especially protective magic, motivated her. Razel smiled and said he was glad to hear that, but admitted he worried she might burn out after reaching her goal, to which Mercia replied she hadn't known about his concern. The Princess of Darkness cheerfully reminded Razel that she promised to be his friend, and she keeps her word. The boy agreed, thinking his former friends were different. Razel said the sandwich was delicious, and the girl happily agreed, adding that she and Jack had made it. The boy was surprised that a demon could cook, but Mercia explained he was one of the best chefs in the castle, and Rizal admitted that appearances can be deceiving. Mercia stretched tiredly, and Rizal said that it was enough for today, and they were heading home. At that moment, a huge shadow fell over them, making both look up. Right before them appeared a huge mouth and eyes, and the dragon angrily shouted, asking if they really dared to disturb his sleep. The Princess of Darkness looked at the monster in shock and exclaimed it was a dragon, to which Rizal asked in surprise if she really knew what they were like. Mercia asked with annoyance if he was crazy, then quickly said, "Of course not," admitting she had never actually seen a dragon before. The boy awkwardly replied that now she had, and Mercia noted this one looked just like the dragons from Legends, prompting Rizal to ask which legends she meant. The princess began seriously explaining that about 10,000 years ago, a dragon destroyed the civilization that once lived here. She added that those lucky enough to survive the storm caused by this dragon restored peace and remain its descendants to this day, unless, of course, they disturb the dragon's slumber. Mercia said that the name of this dragon is the sleeping dragon of ancient times. The Dark Princess looked seriously at the dragon and said they had awakened something terrible, and Rizal sighed thoughtfully after hearing her words. The guy answered completely seriously that it was bad and he really didn't want to wake up, which shocked the girl. Rizal asked eagerly what could be used to strike the dragon to put it back to sleep. Mercia questioned if he was completely foolish and warned that maybe this wasn't a joke to make. But their conversation was cut short by the dragon's fierce roar. The dragon, annoyed and curious about their whispers, called them petty demons, and shouted that they should only watch him, saying it was disrespectful otherwise. Without fully understanding, he shouted that they would regret their interference and began gathering energy for a powerful attack. Mercia remembered Rizal's words and quickly activated the absorption barrier as the dragon launched its attack. When the smoke cleared, the Dark Princess exclaimed in surprise that it actually worked. The dragon was stunned by what had happened. Rizal smiled and told the girl she had already surpassed the dragon's own power, and Mercia, staring at her hands in shock, asked if it was really her. Rizal said he was sure Mercia could kill such a dragon instantly. The girl insisted she could slay the sleeping dragon herself, while the dragon grumbled that they only survived the attack by a stroke of luck. Article 10, Paragraph 3 of the Pact of Man and Beast, states that if the sleeping dragon awakens, humanity's heroes must destroy it, and Paragraph 4 adds that after fulfilling Paragraph 3, the demon tribe is to be handed over to humans no more than at any other time. The princess laughed cruelly and said that if they defeated him, the terrible contract would be cancelled. She added that she would take his body with her and, laughing, remarked that he now looked like a true lord of demons. Rizal smiled and looked at the girl, saying that Mercia should keep going, as this wasn't enough to prepare her for the hero's role, but this battle would be her unforgettable first fight. He was proud of her. The girl smiled and said her first fight would be against a real dragon, and no one would believe it. The dragon, angered by their arrogance, called them tiny insects. The monster rose and roared loudly that it would burn them to ashes. But Mercia angrily replied that she would destroy it for the future of the demons. She spread her arms wide and smiled broadly as giant spikes appeared around her, her cold gaze locking onto the monster before summoning a magical spear. Meanwhile, the dragon showed no signs of stopping. It began gathering a massive blast of fiery power in its mouth to kill them, warning that they had brought down its full wrath. In the next moment, he unleashed all his power on those trying to kill him, while Mercia matched him, directing her attack straight at the dragon, and a massive explosion erupted, engulfing the battlefield in complete darkness. When the smoke and dust settled, the dragon's legs could be seen through the haze, and in the next moment, it collapsed helplessly to the ground. The girl, unable to believe her eyes, looked over the monster's body and asked if this was really the end, and if she had won. Rizal laughed inwardly, a bit surprised and nervous, thinking Mercia's skills had improved much faster than he expected, though he also noted that the dragon itself was quite weak. Mercia calmly approached the monster's body and said it needed to be finished off before it could suddenly wake up again. Rizal looked at her and couldn't help but admire her bravery. He stepped closer and asked Mercia what she planned to do with the dragon's body, and she replied loudly that she would use it as a powerful bargaining chip in any negotiations with the humans. Mercia crouched down, studying the dragon's body closely, and asked if this would be enough to convince everyone that it died by their hands. She asked Rizal what he thought about using him to create magical artifacts, pointing out that the material from a dragon who lived for tens of thousands of years shouldn't be wasted, and asked if he agreed. Rizal pondered her words. Suddenly, he let out a sharp breath and said he remembered everything, realizing it was exactly as he thought. Mercia turned to him, asked what happened and if he had any ideas, and the boy smiled, confirming she was right. Mercia instantly brightened up and, looking at the boy, asked what exactly he meant, urging him to tell her as soon as possible. Rizal warmly smiled and said there was no need to rush, He added that he would need her help and would explain everything, then began his brief story. Soon, as night fell and the moon rose high, the Demon King's castle buzzed with lively chatter. She looked at the item with surprise and asked if it was really a gift. The girl said it was wonderful but didn't understand why anyone would suddenly decide to give her something, to which Mercia proudly replied that first you have to accept the gift, and only then say anything. Razel, sighing awkwardly, agreed with the idea. Then a weapon appeared in the air which she looked at with awe, and when she asked what it was, Razel explained it was a magical sword forged from the materials of a sleeping dragon. He explained that when she channels magical power into the sword, it will activate a stored magic circle and reveal its effect. Moreover, it's charged with magic circles created by Mercia's magic, so only blood relatives can use it. In other words, this is a unique weapon that only she can wield. The girl jumped up and shouted loudly that she couldn't accept such a precious thing, and wouldn't be able to handle such power on her own. At that moment, Mercia took a deep breath and called her sister's name, her face very serious as she spoke to the younger one. Suddenly, smiling warmly, she said that even if the current heroes win, there's no guarantee that a second or third hero won't appear. Her sister watched her silently. Then after a brief pause, she thought for a moment and asked if she really had to take Mercia's place in the battles. At that moment she felt a flicker of doubt, realizing she would have to fight on her own without Mercia by her side. She gripped her weapon firmly, looked ahead with confidence, and said she understood and would be very grateful to them in that case. Then she smiled warmly and said she wasn't very skilled with a sword, so she'd keep it safely in a magical vault. Razel smiled and joked that, unfortunately this time he wasn't the one who killed the dragon. She asked in surprise what that meant, then, realizing, looked at her sister and asked if it was true. Mercia smiled proudly and confirmed that she was the one who killed the sleeping dragon. The sister exclaimed with delight that it was wonderful. Mercia, proud, lifted her head, but at the moment of triumph, Razel quietly added that the princess had been very scared at first, to which the girl replied irritably that she heard perfectly well. She looked at them and asked with disbelief if that meant the entire dragon's material was used to make this sword. Mercia cheerfully said they had some extras left over, so they'd be throwing a big feast soon. She immediately said that a feast with dragon meat was too extravagant, though her face lit up with joy. Mercia shook her head and suggested inviting the castle servants to join in. Shashiel smiled and said the servants would help prepare the dragon meat. Mercia looked away and added that the butchering should be left to Rizal, and Razel calmly promised everything would be cooked perfectly. After some time of preparation, many people gathered in a building with very high ceilings, all standing and chatting around a table beautifully laid out with food in the center. She said everyone would be eating dragon meat and added that she never thought she'd see the day. Mercia also mentioned she still can't believe it, even though the meat really is tasty. Razel added that active dragons usually have tough meat, but after so many years of sleep, it became tender and tasty. Mercia said that after training, she managed to kill a dragon and is now enjoying a brief moment of peace, though nothing is decided yet because the real challenge hasn't even begun. She added that she would do everything possible to keep this peace forever, then looked up and said the real battle was about to begin, asking if that was true. Razel confirmed and added that dragons can't match the power of the fusion hero bears, speaking with a very serious tone. Mercia replied that she fully understands, since behind every group of heroes stands a vile goddess who has ruled humanity from the shadows for thousands of years, and no one knows what she might do if she senses defeat. Shashiel looked ahead and said they needed to stay orderly and keep control, and Razel closed his eyes and agreed. The girl smiled at them and said she truly believed they could handle whatever came next. Mercia smiled and said that after this battle, she would leave this world and the peace treaty with the Shashiel people would remain, but the girl must not make any compromises. Shashiel smiled darkly and said she could leave it to her, as she mentally trains every day on how to wipe out humanity, then paused, wondering what would happen if she lost control of her power. Razel and Mercia instantly felt a surge of fear as they watched her reaction. The Dark Princess, sweating from the tension, said she was counting on her sister in this matter. The Demon King's castle was still buzzing with noise as countless demons gathered for a feast, simply enjoying life. Mercia collapsed onto the couch, smiling broadly, and said she simply couldn't eat another bite. Despite this, Razel laughed, saying it was hard to believe she was the Demon Queen. Mercia turned over and replied she was just full, and her sister ran up, commenting that she looked too messy. Suddenly, Razel and Mercia both felt something unsettling at the same time. They froze, listening carefully to what had just happened. Razel turned around and asked the girls if they had noticed it. Mercia confirmed, adding dryly that 3 men were standing by the main gate. They started guessing who they might be. Razel said it was hard to gauge their fighting strength, but was almost certain about their identity. He realized these were the so-called heroes, while nearby at the gate stood the official fraud, the adventurer Rael, and the mercenary Banzo, all three visibly tense. Fraud smiled casually, as if to say, "So this is the Demon Lord's castle." Banzo was tense, while Riol, with a slight smile, remarked he was disappointed the journey was so short, taking only a few months. The adventurer Riol cracked his knuckles and grinned widely, declaring that their target was the Demon Lord and he would show him everything, while Banzo panicked and begged him to wait. He took a deep breath, realizing he had said too much, but it didn't change anything. Riol approached the gates and shouted loudly for the demons to bring their master at once, his face stern and serious. The guards drew their swords and asked what was happening and who the orcs were, declaring that these people would never enter the castle. Riol, genuinely offended at being called an orc, clenched his fist and asked what exactly the demon had said. Angry, Riol clenched his fists and threw them down. Clearly the guard really wanted to get beaten. He asked one last time if the demon would bring his master. The guard stood his ground, firmly declaring he would defend the gates, even at the cost of his own life. Shashiel looked on with concern, realizing the situation was dire. Razel suggested it might be time to go outside, and Mercia took a deep breath and agreed. Razel noticed that if he thought that way, he should have been dead long ago. But he's still alive. Mercia suggested maybe he should have disguised himself, and the boy thought it over and agreed she was probably right. Meanwhile, the hero took a fighting stance, ready to defeat the demon. The guardian raised his weapon, prepared to fight at any moment. And when Riol shouted, the guardian echoed him, provoking an attack. The next moment they lunged at each other, but just before their weapons met, a loud explosion rang out, surprising them both and pausing the fight. Riol jumped back and asked what happened, while Fraud and Banzo rushed over, worried if he was okay. At that moment, a huge cocoon of magic hovered in the air before the hero and the guard, who cautiously said it was magic. The cocoon opened, revealing two figures inside. Mercia gave the uninvited guests a fierce look and asked if they understood where they had ended up. Riol, slightly surprised, noted the arrival of the Lord himself, while Banzo warned carefully that the hero's next move could destroy them. The knights guarding the castle bowed to Mercia, apologizing and promising to gather warriors and defeat the enemies immediately, but Mercia told them not to worry. The Princess of Darkness looked at the uninvited guests and said she wanted to talk with them too. Banzo wondered if they could reach an agreement and thought it might be worth trying to learn something useful from them. Riol asked the princess angrily how she dared speak to them that way, but Banzo stopped him, asking him to wait. The hero, a bit nervous, said he had an idea and asked for a moment, surprising Riol. Banzo turned to Mercia, explaining they were not from this world, and apologized for any rudeness, saying the girl likely held an important place among the demons and asking permission to ask her one question. Banzo admitted with a hint of despair that it was rude but still asked her to listen. Riol skeptically asked if that was really their plan, and Fraud reluctantly agreed the hero was clever, so for now, they should let things go as planned. Using telekinesis, Mercia irritably told Razel that they had broken into the castle, caused a conflict, and still wanted to talk. The guy realized he was dealing with summoned heroes this time, and the girl apologized that he would be the one to face them. At that moment, the hero interrupted Razel and Mercia's conversation by mentioning bravery and synthesis, then asked if they were familiar with demons, which took them by surprise. The girl asked gloomily if they really knew those words, and Banzo, shocked, replied by asking if she knew them too. The Princess of Darkness looked at Razel and asked what they would do next. He said the choice was hers, and she confidently replied that she understood everything. Mercia turned around and, as she walked away, ordered them to get ready. Razel nodded in agreement while Banzo watched them go with surprise. Riol and Fraud approached Katsi, bombarding him with questions about what was happening. Riol asked why all this was necessary, and Banzo, clearly worried, kept insisting that everything was fine. Suddenly, a huge seal appeared above the gathered heroes, surprising the boy. Riol panicked, turned around, and asked what it was. Fraud exclaimed he'd never seen such a large and complex magic circle. But Riol snapped that now was not the time for questions, while Banzo watched them silently. The heroes started raging, shouting that they had been betrayed, insisting that demons would never make such a deal. And Banzo was stunned, realizing they had truly been deceived. They shouted as they watched the light above them grow brighter, and at that moment, the girl told the summoned heroes to lift their heads. The heroes looked at the girl before them, completely confused, and froze in place. Mercia smiled and told the guests they were in the audience hall of the Demon Lord's castle. A girl appeared before them, confidently declaring herself the mistress of demons, with Raziel standing quietly by her side. Banzo was stunned to find themselves in the throne room. Fraud couldn't believe she had transported them all, and Raol asked in surprise if it was really a demon lord. The Princess of Darkness confidently addressed the summoned heroes. promising to reveal the truths of this world and inviting them to ask anything, while Banzo immediately asked what heroic synthesis is and why they were called. The Demon Queen began explaining that, like dozens of heroes before them, they must unite into one composite hero, the source of power, who is humanity's main weapon and the demon's sworn enemy. Banzo said in shock that he knew it, while another hero started shouting that they had truly been betrayed. Raoul demanded proof, claiming it was the king's conspiracy, and Fraud tried to calm him down. Mercia, sitting on the throne, said she understood his distrust but, given his fiery temper, advised him to be patient for a while, which left Banzo feeling unsettled. Suddenly, Razel looked at them and noticed they hadn't seen each other in a long time. Raoul cautiously asked who he was, and the boy replied that they wouldn't recognize him like this as his disguise began to fade. Razel appeared before them, asking how the heroes were feeling and saying he wanted to show them something. Banzo exclaimed in surprise that it was the same boy. Raoul was shocked, and Fraud added that he should have been dead. Raoul suspiciously asked if this was another trick, and Razel, while creating something, replied that the hero could see for himself it wasn't a trick, as a small camera appeared in his hands. Banzo, seeing the image, asked in surprise if it was really the king's chamber. Fraud was impressed by the accuracy of the picture, calling it amazing technology, while Raoul, puzzled, asked how he had found the place. They looked at the picture and asked who the man in front of the king was. The hero noted he hadn't seen him in the palace, and Mercia smiled, saying that was very convenient. The Demon Lord declared that this was a synthetic hero, the result of their efforts, but Fraud angrily shouted that he was just an ordinary person, and while the girl might fool others, she wouldn't fool him. The guy pointed at the screen and asked if they could see the numbers in the video. The heroes wondered what it meant, and Razel explained that it was his first measurement of combat power since arriving in this world. Fraud asked in shock how it was possible to summon a hero with such power, and confirmed if they really meant that this was the result of combining all the heroes summoned in the past. The Princess of Darkness explained that the heroes summoned at first only ended up as food for the monster. Banzo was stunned and said it was impossible, asking if that meant they could never return to their world. With tears in his eyes, Fraud couldn't believe he'd never see his family again. The hero asked what to do next, and Raoul swore, demanding answers. Mercia looked at them seriously and said that demons had been oppressed by humans for centuries because of their power and numbers, and that this is the truth of their world. The girl spoke with anger about years of humiliation, the wrongs done to their friends, people, and homeland, declaring she would never forgive humanity. In despair, Banzo dropped to his knees and begged the girl for any kind of help. The hero started shouting that he was ready for any job, no matter if it was serving or small tasks. He would do whatever he was told. The Demon Queen looked at them and said she was curious about what the other summoned heroes thought of her. Frodo remained silent, while Raoul sighed in frustration. The next moment, Fraud also nodded in agreement, prompting a surprised exclamation from Raoul, who then apologized, explaining that he was determined to get back home no matter what. Raoul gritted his teeth but also bowed to the girl. Banzo pleaded with the Demon Queen to have mercy on them, poor fools, and save them. Mercia smiled broadly and gave the heroes their first command. The Demon Queen declared that 3 of the summoned must die, and her words made the boys look at her in shock. Meanwhile, the kingdom reported that a group of adventurers who ventured into Demonlands sparked an internal conflict that led to their deaths, and it was said the demons would blame humans for the killings due to their past behavior. The report stated that this could be seen as negligence leading to death, with a minimum punishment of 1 year in prison. The king, reading the report with displeasure, declared it fair. He was glad no one started whining or demanding an investigation, adding that accusations from cursed demons are no easy matter, when suddenly a ring flared up above his head. A sudden movement made him look up. The king cursed loudly, shouted, and fell to the floor, clutching his head, asking what had happened and what had fallen, and when he looked closer, he froze for a moment in shock. In front of him on the floor lay bodies, and with horror on his face he began to stammer, shouting that these were corpses. He noticed holes in their stomachs and, shocked, asked why they were in his office. The next moment, he started losing consciousness, muttering that this was a nightmare. A few hours earlier, the summoned heroes gathered in the Demon Lord's castle, where the Dark Princess gave them their first command. They must die for her. The heroes, shocked, asked if the girl had really betrayed them, and Banzo asked what that meant. Mercia said she only speaks the truth, and Razel, a bit agitated, asked her to stop tormenting him, while the girl muttered something thoughtfully. The next moment, the Dark Princess laughed loudly in agreement with the boy, and added that she had already seen enough of the foolish faces of the summoned heroes. Raoul, surprised, asked what had just happened. He frowned and asked if they were just a joke to her. Razel noticed the girl seemed offended, but Mercia smiled and apologized, saying she was just having fun. Banzo called out to the hero anxiously, and Riol replied that he's definitely not the type to act before thinking, asking the girl to explain everything in a way even he could understand. Mercia looked at him in surprise, then told him not to belittle himself, adding that she liked honest people like him. The Dark Princess asked Razel to explain to the others, and he agreed. Razel reminded them that the heroes were told about his death and asked if they thought he had tricked the pursuers and the kings. Frode guessed it was some kind of special magic. Banzo said he just played dead, and Riol said he would have run away as fast as he could in his place. Razel said he had hidden the body. The heroes were surprised and said that sounded suspicious. Then Frode exclaimed he understood what was going on. Riol asked what it meant, and Frodo explained that the boy had a different body. Banzo then concluded that he had committed murder. Razel interrupted, saying he hadn't killed anyone in this world, only prepared his own corpse. Mercia laughed, but, not believing him, started joking, which offended him. Frode, curious, asked if the boy really had a different body. Banzo dismissed it as nonsense, while Raol, frightened, admitted he didn't like ghosts or anything like that, and asked to be left alone. Razel explained that he used multifunctional stem cells to create his clone. It was the same magic as Frodo's, belonging to cloning magic, and in his world, cloning technology already existed, but was far from practical use, so it made sense that he took advantage of it. Riol decided that if he died in battle, he could move into another body, and, excited, he said that even if it was a clone, he was still alive. Then he asked if that was true, and added that he didn't like it. Frode said it was definitely unethical. Banzo asked what ethical purpose cloning even served. Riol was scared at the thought of his copy being nearby, and Razel explained that clones had very limited functions. The boy suddenly shouted loudly, summarizing what was said, which scared the others. Then Razel said that this time they had to use clones, insisting he would complete his mission no matter what anyone thought, and Mercia awkwardly asked if the guy's consent was needed for that. This was advanced cloning magic. The bodies looked so real it amazed the heroes. Razel repeated that their life functions were disabled, and explained he used clone corpses to fake their deaths. Frode asked what Razel planned to do with the prepared bodies, since it was too dangerous to leave them on human lands. Banzo added that in the wilderness they would quickly decompose and become unrecognizable, and Razel agreed, but assured them he had an effective plan. Razel looked at the heroes and said he would send the bodies straight to the king's chamber, while Mercia added that she would attach a magically sealed letter to them. Later, in the king's chambers, someone hesitantly tried to wake him, and the man frowned, mumbling something. Regis anxiously spoke to the king, relieved he had woken up. The king called him by name, and the servant explained he had heard screams and ran to check, where he found a man surrounded by corpses. The exhausted king confirmed he had seen the bodies and suddenly asked whose they were. Regis explained that these were 3 summoned heroes he had sent to the demon lord's castle. The king said he understood, and added that the lord had finally crossed the line, then hesitated, wondering if it was too soon to bring back their bodies, while Regis hesitated to say more. The servant handed the king a small device, saying it might hold the answer, and the man frowned, asking what it was. Regis explained that the device was lying next to the bodies and a note, resembling a machine used to transport summoned heroes, with a range of 20,000 kilometers. The king noted that the demon lord's castle was only 4,000 away, but still couldn't believe such technology existed. The king angrily cursed the demons, suspecting they had captured a great sage, since only such a person could create the strange device. And when he asked about the letter, Regis quickly handed it over. The message said it's the season for cauldron dishes, so they've cooked the gifted heroes and are sending them back. The girl also mentioned they've taken care of the sleeping ancient dragon and want to break the contract, canceling food trade and declaring war by returning the heroes. After reading the letter, the king crumpled it in his fist and shouted about the demon's audacity, demanding a review of the deals and asking if Fladialka understood the consequences, while Regis pleaded with him to calm down for the sake of his health. The king feared they were plotting to spread lies and quickly overthrow the kingdom, and in his mind, he cursed the girl and her entire people. He ordered Regis to prepare synthetic heroes for the campaign, and send them to the demon lord with a warning that they would burn and wipe out his lands. Regis, trembling, respectfully noted that the demon's recent movements seemed suspicious and suggested sending scouts first. The king asked angrily if Regis was defying him and if he wanted to be executed, and the servant fearfully assured him he would obey. The king was once again cursing the demon lord in his thoughts, deciding to use the newly created heroes to remind him of his place. At night, loud laughter echoed through the castle, and the king decided it was time to put an end to it all. The Princess of Darkness laughed and told them to look at the result, happily noting that the king had fallen into her trap. While Rael fell silent sadly, Fraud remarked that this is what the Demon Lord looks like, and Banzo added, confused, that she seemed no different from an ordinary girl. Razel noted that the king would never follow the order, but if it was framed as an offense to his honor or achievements, things might change. Mercia smiled, saying she didn't expect him to give in so easily, and laughed. The Demon Queen smiled with satisfaction, saying she hit the mark, while Razel grinned, admitting she did well and added that he'd be here soon. Rael said that now, after seeing everything, he doesn't know what to do. Fraud shyly admitted he was ashamed, and Banzo realized he had never suspected this before, probably because of his life of luxury. Mercia was glad they intercepted the guys before the synthesis. Rael noted it sounded strange, Frode agreed, saying it was nothing compared to cloning. Banzo had been tense since then, and Razel pointed out they had gotten too relaxed. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. Razel was surprised to see who it could be, and a man arrived, saying he had brought them a teleportation grimoire, which Razel accepted. The servant also said he had brought a letter. Mercia took it, thanked him for his work, smiled, and said she would count on him if anything else came up, to which the servant agreed before leaving quickly. The Princess of Darkness curiously opened the letter, read it carefully, and said she understood everything. Razel asked how things were with the king, and if they got what they wanted, and the girl smiled, saying everything was great. Mercia explained that a month ago, in the western desert of Menaras, the king ordered the synthetic Gary to set out to pacify the Demon Lord for violating Article 7.3 of the treaty between humans and demons. Riol guessed the war had finally begun. Frode said he'd never been this nervous before, and Banzo added he'd never fought anyone stronger than himself. At that moment, the Demon Queen looked at them and asked what they were talking about, and Rizal said he wouldn't bother them this time. Riol, Fraud, and Banzo looked at the couple before them in surprise, completely unable to understand what they had just heard. Razel said that as few people as possible would take part in the war. Humanity's goal is to showcase the overwhelming power of synthetic heroes, defeat the Demon Lord, and subjugate the demons, noting that the chance of a sudden demon attack is extremely low. Mercia said she plans to take advantage of this by striking at the synthetic heroes, the main weapon of humanity, and shattering their pride. The summoned heroes stared at the girl in shock, unable to believe it was possible, as they tried to grasp what she meant. The Demon Queen confidently declared that she and the synthetic heroes would fight on their own. At the Demon Lord's castle, Rizal sighed and thoughtfully said that for now, things would stay as they are. A freed Banzo met a young man, wished him good morning, and asked what he was doing there. The young man said he was preparing for a decisive battle and guessed the hero was just out for a walk. Banzo nodded as he warmed up, glanced at the strange device, and asked if the guy was training with it. Rizal explained that it was an artifact for transmitting images, and that he had placed several of them around the area, even inside the castle. The hero was surprised to hear they were everywhere, and asked if he really had that many magic stones. Banzo hoped one wouldn't be needed for each. Razel admitted they were scarce, but Frodo shared his because he had the magic of storage. Banzo thought the final battle date was set just yesterday, and was amazed that the boy had created so many artifacts in one day, deciding that Razel was even more dangerous than the Princess of Darkness. The hero asked why they were even hanging them up, and the boy replied that he wanted everyone to see the battle between the Princess of Darkness and the hero. Banzo asked why he needed it, and Razel explained that this way everyone would know the girl's strength and wouldn't dare to touch her, even with a finger, when she wasn't around. The hero was surprised she wouldn't be there. He guessed she was going somewhere, then smiled and said he wanted to invite her into his world, where someone was about to get what they deserved. Banzo was stunned, wondering if there really was a world where someone Razel couldn't defeat, and he realized that even all the summoned heroes together wouldn't be able to harm him. The hero looked at the boy and thought how lucky he was not to have to fight him, then offered his help, which Razel gratefully accepted. After a moment, the girl started counting, testing the sound on the microphone. People gathered around, curious about the noise. Recognizing Seren, Zarina thanked the demons for waiting and announced that the final battle between the hero and the Dark Princess was about to begin. On screen, Demonessa smiled and pointed out the huge army gathered against them, introducing herself as Zarina from the Princess of Darkness's guard, here to narrate the events. Rizal looked at the gathered army and noted they were fewer than expected. Mercia said they probably think demons are weak, and the Dark Princess added that it's time to put them in their place. Someone stepped forward, complaining that the demons were boasting about their ability to fly, pointing out there were only 2 of them, and shouted that his opponents had underestimated them. A young man in armor appeared before them, greeted Mercia, said he hadn't seen her in a long time, and that the Dark Princess had become a beautiful woman. Mercia replied that compliments from someone who can't even remember her name are worthless, adding that the goddess isn't here. The guy laughed, saying that's natural since she won't come, and he alone is enough for them. The Princess of Darkness telepathically asked Rizal if there were signs of the goddess nearby. He replied that there were, but she wasn't in battle mode, and guessed she was just watching out of boredom, to which the girl said she understood. She wasn't planning to help. Rizal thought that Bagetas had no intention to attack and drew some conclusions. Suddenly, the young man exclaimed that he remembered something important and said he had to leave the girl alone. He was sure she could handle it, but Mercia asked with a hint of suspicion if he was up to something again. She sighed in frustration, then smiled and said that even if she asked him to stay, he would leave anyway, so he might as well go. The Princess of Darkness relaxed and said she would finish her tasks before his return. Rizal vanished into thin air with a smile, replying that he would be more than happy. At that moment, the hero smiled and asked the girl if she was really going to fight alone, and whether the demon race would help her, adding that maybe then she'd stand a chance, but Mercia just looked at him silently. Suddenly, a quiet chuckle escaped the Dark Princess's lips. Then she burst out laughing, prompting the hero to ask in surprise what was so funny. Mercia smiled and said she finally saw the difference in their strength and couldn't believe she was ever afraid of such a weakling, then looked at him grimly and said it was almost laughable. The hero exclaimed in frustration that he was truly weak and asked if she was talking about him. The atmosphere around the guy shifted. He turned to Nisha, said he could handle it himself, and asked her not to interfere, to which she quickly agreed. The Princess of Darkness was surrounded by dark energy as she coldly said the hero was a fool for falling for such a simple provocation. Mercia waved her hand sharply and declared that the hero would die today, and the determined young man charged into battle as well. The hero swung his sword confidently through the air and declared he would finish her off in 10 seconds. Mercia easily blocked the attack with her shield, lifted her head to the sky where clouds gathered and lightning began to flash. A sudden bolt of lightning struck the ground right at the boy's feet, hitting him and making him scream. Drops of blood fell to the ground as the hero glared at the girl with hatred, cursing. Mercia, bored, asked if he was still standing and floated up, adding that such a wound wouldn't heal quickly, causing the hero to groan in pain once more. He smiled and assured her he could easily heal such a wound, but didn't get to finish because the girl took the next step. A series of explosions went off overhead, catching his attention. While the hero mockingly said she was scaring him with her snaps, Mercia snapped her fingers, and a lightning-fast attack caught him completely off guard. Blood splattered from his mouth as he noted how fast the girl was, casting her spell instantly, while Mercia smiled and called him a fool. The Dark Princess unleashed her energy on the hero, who thanked her for the chance to heal his wounds but didn't finish speaking before her power froze his body. The power of Mercia surged swiftly through his wound. Stunned, he asked what was happening, and the girl replied thoughtfully that this was exactly how it should be, and that was enough. The Dark Princess looked at the wounded hero and coldly said she was simply stronger than him, and that was the end. The hero, exhausted, began to fall backward, admitting that it was all true, and as he hit the ground, he crumbled away, leaving behind only his skeleton. Mercia watched indifferently and stayed silent. Then after a few seconds, she said it was boring. The hero's comrade approached the body in shock, unable to believe what he saw, and hesitated to call out, but there was no response. Watching with joy, Zarina exclaimed about the fight's finale, calling the hero's death pointless. She declared it an undeniable victory for the Dark Princess, and cheers of support echoed all around. The demoness announced the end of the broadcast and finally greeted the Dark Princess. Then the transmission cut off. Mercia quickly turned to the boy and asked if he had seen everything, adding that she had handled it swiftly. Rizal smiled and confirmed, calling the fight excellent and saying he had also finished his tasks. Mercia asked with a sly squint what he had been up to, and the boy smiled gently, saying he hadn't done anything bad, just stolen a hero's artifact, which made the girl sigh in surprise. She asked in surprise if it was the same artifact, and the boy happily confirmed, saying such a thing couldn't be left behind. Mercia asked with interest if she could try it now, and Rizal, removing the disguise, advised waiting until the audience had left. He lifted his head and confidently called out to God, declaring that he knew he was watching, and that he had taken the hero's artifact, so let him appear. But there was no answer. Rizal looked around, and the Dark Princess noticed the provocation had worked, even though God hadn't appeared. Mercia spoke irritably about the cost, but the boy closed his eyes, smiled, and said it was no big deal. He'd soon create a situation that would definitely make him show up. Mercia, her eyes sparkling, asked if he was going to do it right now, and Rizal turned with a smile, confirming he was. He declared that he would begin an experiment to merge himself with the hero, his eyes full of determination. Mercia smiled and said that even if she asked him to stay, he would still leave, and added that she would have everything finished here before he returned. Razel replied that he would be more than happy to help. And as he walked away, he thought that with her powers, the girl could easily manage on her own. The guy thought that now, with the security weakened, he could steal the hero's synthesizer. Razel studied the map carefully. Judging by the markings, the device should be somewhere around here. After a while, he slipped into the locked room and looking around noticed it was empty. In the center stood the device he needed. After making sure there were no traps, Razel grabbed it, thinking they had underestimated him. He silently stared at the trophy in his hands, noting that no one had shown up, and felt irritated because winning it had been far too easy. Calming down, he decided he'd have more free time now. But then something caught his attention and made him smile. He wondered what would happen if he used the device. Soon he returned to the Princess of Darkness, who was watching the defeated hero, and Razel asked if she was done yet. Mercia asked if he had seen everything and mentioned she finished quickly. Razel replied the fight was great and added that he also wrapped up his business. He just stole the hero's artifact. The princess asked in surprise if it was the same artifact, and the boy confirmed, explaining it couldn't be left to their enemies. She then asked if she could try it now, but Razel suggested waiting until the crowd had dispersed. Then he lifted his head and loudly called out to God, declaring that he knew he was watching, and that he had taken the hero's artifact, so let him appear. Mercia said confusedly that God wasn't appearing, and the guy replied that the provocation hadn't worked yet, but soon he'd create the right conditions to make him show up. She asked eagerly if he'd start right now. Razel confidently declared that he would begin the experiment to merge himself with the hero. Mercia was surprised since the experiment was about him, not her, and she asked for clarification. The guy explained that the artifact most likely absorbs magical power from one person and transfers it to another, boosting the total energy, and Mercia listened carefully before asking if it might be better to use it on her. Razel asked in surprise if she didn't understand that herself, but the girl just looked at him with disbelief. He said that when it comes to magical power, it's stronger than him, and Mercia was stunned, unable to believe it. Razel assured her she was strong and would only get stronger, so she had to stay that way, reminding her he had said she needed a partner to fight alongside her, and Mercia thoughtfully repeated that he was her companion. He seriously added that he wasn't joking and didn't want her to be weaker than him, saying he couldn't afford to be helpless. And Mercia nodded clearly in understanding. Razel added that the device holds another secret, which surprised the girl, and he said it might be connected to a goddess. Mercia asked nervously what would happen if the goddess suddenly took over his mind, and the boy replied that while it was possible, he knew the magic of mind control well and could resist it. The princess sadly noted that even if he said no, he would still do things his own way, and Razel confirmed he really wanted to try. He said with curiosity that he would only find out if it works by trying it, and Mercia frowned, saying he had no instinct for self-preservation at all. The guy exclaimed excitedly that it was time to give it a try, and she thought if she agreed now, he'd be over the moon. Razel raised the device in front of him and said they could begin as a force enveloped the body of the fallen hero. He held the device as energy began to flow into it, sparking a great surprise. Mercia stood nearby, shielding her eyes from the bright light shining from him. Razel closed his eyes, thinking the launch went smoothly and he felt no attempts to control him. The Princess of Darkness asked anxiously how things were going, and Razel replied that the magical power was overwhelming but still under control. He smiled broadly and said their experiment was a success. Mercia looked at him in the glow and exclaimed with joy, unable to believe what she was seeing. At that moment, Razel noticed something, and he and the girl looked to the side, where a man was standing. Razel asked if he was the army commander, to which Mercia replied it seemed so, but the stranger denied it. Impressed, he asked where they got the artifact. Razel and Mercia smiled smugly as the boy said he just stole it, calling the owner a fool, and the commander couldn't believe it since the device was hidden deep in the capital. Mercia landed beside the man and told him to deliver the scroll to the king instead of getting upset. When asked what it was, she said it was humanity's surrender document. With tears in his eyes, the commander said that if he brought him to the king, he would either be killed or tortured, so execution would actually be a mercy for him. The princess asked if he was really that afraid of the king, and added that she could cut off his head right now and send it to the capital along with the hero's body. The man, terrified, exclaimed that he understood everything. He ran off to escape, while Mercia shouted for him not to worry, assuring him they would reach the capital before his execution and save him. The commander agreed, promising they would definitely come. The soldiers asked their commander in confusion what had happened, and he replied that they were retreating, ordering them not to ask any unnecessary questions. Razel asked Mercia if that man could deliver the scroll, and she assured her he could. The girl noticed the commander looking at her with eyes that seemed to scream they had to save him. or his ghost would haunt them forever. The Princess of Darkness waved her hand awkwardly and laughed, saying she knew everything and nothing could be done. Razel agreed, noting they needed more time, while Mercia, watching the retreating army, asked if they should teleport them away with magic. Razel raised his hand and examined it closely, then excitedly said he wanted to try a new trick with his magic power, and hearing this, Mercia thoughtfully muttered a few words and said she understood what he meant. Razel looked at the offended girl with a warm smile and asked if she was feeling down. Mercia, twisting a strand of hair around her finger, replied that she was upset because only he got the prize, even though she was the one who defeated the hero. The boy eagerly raised his finger and told her not to worry because he had a secret plan just for her, and Mercia covered her mouth in surprise, exclaiming about his secret plan. Razel smiled broadly and suggested they first return to the Dark Princess's castle, noting that Shishel and the others had been waiting for them for a long time. Mercia gladly agreed, thinking of her subjects and saying she couldn't wait to see their surprised faces. After that, they set off and headed home, with Mercia walking ahead, happily. Suddenly Razel pointed in surprise, making the girl look that way too. In the courtyard of the Demon Lord's palace, all the Princess of Darkness's servants and knights gathered, lined up neatly in rows, with Shishel and Zarina standing at the front, eagerly watching for Mercia. Seeing her subjects, Mercia ran to them with a joyful smile, while Razel stood quietly behind, eyes closed and barely smiling. The Princess of Darkness ran to her younger sister, and Shishel, tears in her eyes, threw herself into her arms. The sisters rejoiced at their reunion, while their servants stood happily behind them. Among everyone, Mercy didn't see Jack, and his absence surprised her. At that moment, a demon appeared near where the sisters were hugging. He carried a large tray of fresh dishes with a broad smile, while the Dark Princess and her sister eagerly eyed the hot feast. Jack glanced at the girls and laughed out loud, while the sisters gazed in awe at the huge slab of meat on the tray. And Razel watched the scene with a smile. The boy stood near the sisters, watching them, when Mercia waved to him, inviting him to come over. Later, the sisters went to bed together. Giselle turned toward her sister, calling her, and Mercia, still with her eyes closed, looked back in surprise. She looked at her sister with great respect and said she truly defeated the hero. Mercia barely opened her eyes, calmly agreed, raised her hand, and added that she did it with these very hands. The younger sister listened quietly, then softly admitted she had been very scared, so much that her hands still trembled, and gently placed her palm over Mercia's hand, surprising the princess. Shishel said with care that Mercia had protected her people and the whole country with these hands, and that they were the hands of a ruler to be proud of, adding that this might be just the first step, but a very important one. Mercia looked at her sister in surprise, who repeated that although it was just the first step, it was a very important one. Shishel said that from now on, even if the Dark Princess isn't nearby, she will protect this country and the whole world, while Razel stood behind the door, listening to the sisters' conversation. Some time had passed, and many demons were waiting for something important, while the Princess of Darkness stood before the wide stairs, watching them. She walked forward confidently, passing by her servants who stood nearby. Mercia stepped onto the large balcony which became her stage, and loudly addressed her subjects, ordering them to be silent. The girl happily announced to the gathered demons that the threat from the hero was gone, and exclaimed that they had regained their freedom, but Mercia warned that new dangers could still arise, so she was setting off on a journey with the hero from another world, Raz Rally. The princess's dark subjects began whispering anxiously and with doubt, while Mercia, with a slight smile, thought their worries were completely natural. She assured them there was nothing to worry about, as she would pass on her wisdom to someone worthy. Then, reaching out her hand, the girl called her sister, who stepped forward confidently. Mercia announced that during her absence, all power would pass to her younger sister Shishil, who still has much to learn but is more skilled in politics than the princess herself. Mercia asked if anyone disagreed, but was met with silence. The Princess of Darkness turned to Shishil and said it was time to greet everyone. Modestly, she agreed, but loudly addressed the demons, warning them she wasn't as kind as her sister, and demanding even greater effort from them all. After a brief speech, Shishil gave her subjects a stern look and asked if everyone understood. The demons froze in fear and hesitantly said yes, while Mercia, stunned, quietly wondered if her sister had gone too far. A few days passed, and Mercia, shivering from the cold, asked what they were going to do now and why they were stranded in the middle of the ocean. Razel replied that they were studying the magic of self-empowerment. The girl asked in surprise why it was so sudden and checked if he really meant self-improvement. The boy confirmed, raised his hand, and asked her to step back. A magical circle flared up beneath his feet, and Mercia noticed that this time, it was taking him longer than usual. In the next moment, a blinding light flashed before the girl. Mercia, shocked by what appeared before her, let out a surprised sigh and asked what it was, only to be met with a loud roar. A giant dragon appeared before the Princess of Darkness, and she cried out in terror, wondering if it was really a dragon. Mercia asked in surprise if self-enhancement meant turning into a dragon, and wondered if it was easy to use magic with such a bulky body. To which Razel in his dragon form replied that he knew she would notice. The guy raised a finger to confirm her guess and added that things here were much more interesting, while Mercia, not understanding what he meant, suddenly went blind again from a bright flash and covered her eyes with her hand. She realized the boy had turned back into human form, and Razel, placing his hand on his chest, invited her to take a closer look at his body, to which the girl suspiciously asked what he meant. Looking seriously, she said the quality of the magical essence had changed and now belonged to a dragon. Moreover, he was using a human form spell layered over his dragon form. Razel smiled and said he never doubted her cleverness. Mercia smugly rubbed her nose and agreed, but he immediately asked about the pros and cons of such a combination, which annoyed her a bit. After thinking it over, the girl said that a dragon's body can't perform delicate magic, while a human's can't handle such powerful spells, and then, surprised, she said everything suddenly made sense. Mercia excitedly explained that Razel didn't cancel the transformation, but simply layered a human form over the dragon one, so there are no drawbacks, and the boy confirmed this, adding that his body is now as strong as a dragon's, and his size doesn't affect his magic control. The girl pouted a little and admitted this was just another challenge. She thought that to become a dragon, she first had to defeat one, never even imagining such a possibility. Mercia nervously asked if she could handle such complicated equipment, but Razel playfully poked her nose and teasingly told her to stop doubting herself. He explained that dragons possess immense magical power, which he could only access by merging with the hero. But she already has this power within her, and that's what makes her special. Razel noticed she always lacked self-confidence. Mercia gave a slight grimace, and he thought years of oppression had taught her to underestimate herself. He looked at her seriously, and explained that doubts only lead to more doubts, and the girl listened carefully. With a smile, he added that his job as a teacher was to give her confidence, and Mercia smiled back, apologized, and said she was counting on him. The guy said she needed to master the self-boosting technique first. Mercia gladly agreed, and he noted her mood was excellent. Razel said she needed to wear a special bracelet for this, and showed a small charm. When she asked about it, he explained it would help her train her magic control, and the girl eagerly put it on, noting how beautiful it was. The guy said excitedly that with this bracelet, she would definitely master the technique, and Mercia happily promised to do her best. After some time had passed, night fell over the Demon Lord's castle, and a large moon rose above the city. Razel sat at a small table, staring at something glowing on the screen in front of him. The young man looked ahead thoughtfully, sighed, and reached out his finger when suddenly someone called his name loudly, making him raise his eyebrows in surprise. Mercia ran up to him with a big smile, happily announcing that she had finally done it, glowing with joy. The girl stood confidently in front of Razel and asked how he liked it, then called out for him to look at her. He sighed in surprise, admitted it was true, and added with excitement that it was impressive. Later, Razel and Mercia traveled to a new place and saw a building that looked like a castle. The boy wondered what it could be, while the girl, amazed, guessed that someone might really live on the moon. They flew closer, and Razel wondered how to get inside. They noticed a small entrance that caught their attention. Mercia guessed it was left open so anyone could enter, and Razel decided there was no longer any problem. The girl carefully scanned the entrance and frowned when she noticed something inside. She guessed it was a trap, but Razel firmly said he didn't sense any hostility. They decided to get closer. The boy said you can't catch a tiger cub without entering the tiger's den, and Mercia quickly agreed. Suddenly Razel stopped abruptly, and Mercia bumped into his back. She peeked around him and asked why he had stopped. Looking ahead in surprise, the girl felt the air and the scent of grass, asking confusedly what it meant. Before them stretched a vast field, with a large tree standing tall in the center. Mercia gasped in shock, asking what it was. Razel calmly explained that it was a created space, and Mercia, surprised, remarked that it must take immense magical power and couldn't believe a human could manage it. The young man objected, saying the creator was not human, when suddenly a voice behind them asked what they needed. They turned sharply with serious faces. Mercia smiled and said no one met them, so they went in on their own, and the stranger replied he was too lazy to come out. Razel looked the young man over carefully and decided he was definitely a draconian, and a strong one at that. The young man yawned lazily and asked again why they were here. Mercia smiled warmly, saying she could see his strength and wanted to fight, while Razel watched with a grin and the draconian looked confused. He chuckled softly, then laughed, noting that they hadn't even tried a surprise attack but challenged him head-on. He said he liked their straightforwardness, which made Mercia blush. The girl, calming down a bit, asked if he accepted the challenge, and the young man confirmed. He looked at the guests with interest and asked who would go first. Razel and Mercia tensed up as the mood shifted. The girl said he was really strong, and Razel agreed. Mercia smiled and asked if he minded them teaming up against him, and the Draconian eagerly replied that it had been thousands of years since anything like that happened, and he was glad for the fun. At that moment, Mercia and Razel took to the air, and the young man followed them. He reached out his hand to start. The girl warned they wouldn't hold back, and Razel smiled, saying it would be fun. Explosions rang out all around, signaling the start of a fierce battle as Mercia was engulfed in flames and smoke. The Draconian quickly jumped back to dodge the strike, and an explosion erupted right where he had been standing. He ended up behind Mercia, glanced at her to warn her not to yawn, then swung his fist and struck. But the attack missed its mark. The young man smiled, noting that Razel had managed to take her place, calling it a pretty good outcome, while Razel stood ahead with a cracked barrier and a smile. Suddenly dark energy wrapped around his clenched fist. The Draconian noticed his movements were restricted and wondered if that was exactly what the boy intended. With a sly smile, he waved it off, shouting that such a small thing wouldn't hold him back, but then something caught his eye. He noticed a girl nearby. He spun around sharply, annoyed, cursing that he hadn't noticed her approach but still couldn't pinpoint exactly where she was. In the next moment, he was struck from behind by an intense magical force that froze his movements, and he thought with pain that he wouldn't have time to react. Razel seized the moment to attack the young man, but he quickly dodged, landed, and instantly launched a counterattack. The Dragonian's fist hit the boy, who smiled and pointed out that Razel was using dragon-shaped magic, to which Razel replied he was just practicing. The Dragonian's hand started to sprout scales, and he snapped in frustration that it was happening again, guessing the guy wanted to trap him completely, cursing, while Razel just sighed with a smile. Mercia appeared behind the Dragonian and kicked him, while Razel added that dragons quickly lose focus in battle, and that's their weakness. The Draconian suddenly turned around and, smiling, said the blow should have been stronger. In the next moment, he was struck hard in the face, sending him flying backward with a scream, his face covered in blood. Razel looked down at him with a smile, saying this was not over yet, and attacked again, striking his body with his hand. With a huge hole in its body, the Dragonian began to fall, and the boy and girl watched as it crashed to the ground with a thunderous impact. Lying there with severe wounds, he admitted defeat and suddenly claimed that Razel and Mercia were from another world, which surprised them both greatly. Razel approached and asked if the young man had really figured it out. The young man confirmed, explaining that their clothes gave them away right away, and added that he wanted to teach the boy his technique. Razel asked in surprise if it was really his technique. The Draconian laughed, saying he was worried his Princess of Darkness might not be very skilled, and the girl shyly agreed. He smiled and asked if the boy would grant his last wish. Razel looked at Mercia, who smiled and nodded. Razel knelt before the young man and agreed, taking the Dragonian's hand as they were surrounded by energy. Razel smiled and said everything went well, while the young man, using his last strength, said he was glad to fight such strong opponents because it was a true pleasure. After that, he closed his eyes and quietly smiled as he went still. Mercia asked if he had died, and Razel confirmed it. The girl admitted she still couldn't believe in this person's power, and Razel replied that he had dedicated his entire life to mastering his craft. Mercia fell silent in frustration, feeling like the guy had just stung her. She turned to Razel and asked him to listen, questioning why he had killed the Dragonian when the fight was already decided, and Razel hesitated before answering. Mercia asked if it wouldn't be better to have such a strong fighter on their side, but Razel raised his hand to stop her and said she'd understand once she saw the equipment the Draconian had given him. The girl then asked for clarification about the equipment. She suddenly realized something and, shocked, asked what kind of technique Razel had received. The boy just laughed and said it was called Resurrection of the Dead, leaving Mercia breathless with amazement. The girl started yelling loudly at the Dragonian, calling him a lizard, and shouted at Razel to bring the young man back to life because she was going to strangle him again herself. Razel laughed and said she had fallen for it.